Good afternoon, everybody. If I can ask you to take your places again, we've got a lot to cover in the afternoon, and so we'll try and get started and keep on time as we've done so wonderfully this morning. Right. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope that you had a nice lunch and you're feeling fully refueled now. And so we've got quite a busy afternoon. We've been looking at a lot of different topics this morning. And so this morning was very much focused on future fuels. We had some very interesting presentations there. This afternoon, we're moving on to looking more at alternative propulsion systems. And so we're going to start off straight away now with the CGN giving us a presentation talking about decarbonization of transport. Then we're going to move on and have a presentation from Siemens Energy looking at fuel cell and battery solutions to reduce carbon emissions. And then we have a panel discussion just before the coffee break where we're looking at the idea of beyond concept, complete ship electrification as a reality. So quite busy afternoon, and then after that we have a coffee break and then some more presentations looking at atomic, advanced atomic, and we'll be finishing up with a dialogue on decarbonization. That'll be the fireside chat between MSC and Shell, which should be a very, very interesting discussion as well. So on that note, would you please welcome to the screen, to the scene here, Benoît Gaillard from CGN. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So this module is about alternative propulsion systems. Mostly it's about alternating between different ways of powering a ship, in our case. There I'll be talking about an example where it's more like the alternative is between using the waterway or using the highway. And I think you'll find it interesting, even though it's not directly linked to the shipping activity. So we are the CGN. We are the only company operating commercial boats on the Lake Geneva. And the company was founded more than 100 years ago. We are very known here in the region for the steamboats, but we don't do only steamboats, in part because they're not so environmentally friendly, but also because there is a lot of further potential on this lake than only admiring it from a historic boat, which is an experience I'd like to recommend, even though. Okay, so I'll start here. We have a very dense public mass transit system here around the lake in Geneva. So as you can see, we just the construction of a new train line. Where's the pointer of the? Oh. No. The other way. So we have a very effective mass transit system here all around the lake, but still there are some gaps that could be closed with waterway transportation, and that's what we are trying to show now, that there are gaps that can be usefully closed by commuter lines on the lake. It's not about tourism, it's not about enjoying the view, it's just about getting from point A to point B, and it's about encouraging, as I was saying, modal shift from cars to public transportation. So between the highway and the waterway, we want to convince people that they should choose the waterway because it's quicker and it's going to be more energy efficient as well. So you have some trips between this region here and this region here, where, for example, one of the largest private banks in Geneva is building a new headquarters that are going to be 30 minutes shorter using boats as a means of transportation compared with using your car or the train all around the lake. So this is just to exemplify what I just said. Here is where the line would start. As you can see, we would expand the perspective, the places you can reach within the same time significantly on this side of the lake, which is the side where a lot of economic activity is situated as well. So there is tremendous potential for people that have been using their cars every day to commute to work to shift to a public transportation means, which would be, in that case, the boat. Why is it about decarbonation, you might ask? Because as I will explain afterwards, we will be using first traditional boats, so diesel-powered. It is, first of all, a carbon-free project in the end, because we are meaning it seriously when we say it's a zero-car project. There is no car access to the terminals. There is, of course, no car transport on the boats themselves. It's only accessible with a bike, on foot, or by public transport. So we are trying also there to not only act on our part of the transportation chain, but also to make people use public transportation or active mobility, sustainable mobility means from the very beginning of the trip until the very end. And as we know in public mobility, this is decisive. Once people get into their car, they will never get out until they are at destination. But if you can hinder them, prevent them from getting into the car and offer a better alternative, then it's going to be possible to bring them with public transportation or active mobility up to the destination. With the boat, we also have a competitive advantage over trains and buses, for example, which is real estate on board is more accessible. It's easier to create large spaces, for example, for taking the bike on the boat, for taking the electrical scooter on the boat. You might have heard, I think, all around the world, companies, bus, train, streetcar companies are struggling with the questions of, can you allow people to take their bags with them? Can you allow every scooter to get on board with the passengers? It's very hard. It's a lot less hard on a boat where you have space, so you can create this chain of mobility. You use your bike, get on the boat, use your bike again, and you've been carbon free, or at least you've reduced your emissions all the way. So as you can see, the train I was talking about is making something like this, because here is a big French city, and that's one of the reasons the connection are a little less good here for public transportation, but the network of biking slopes is very good, and that's also one of the assets we're going to build on for this new blue line. So we're taking here a two-steps approach, and this is a full disclosure. We're not going carbon-free from the beginning because we can't. The capital expenditure would be too high. We are a publicly funded company, and it's true, it's sad, but it's true that today it's still kind of hard to convince public authorities that they have to come up with the capital expenditure up front before they can see the benefits. So we are trying to do decarbonation in that we are convincing people from switching from highway to waterway, and this is good because public transportation, even though the boat is diesel powered, is better than everyone being alone in his or her car. But of course, we know that we have in the second step we have to decarbonize the propulsion as well. The idea we are trying, even though we are more than 100 years old, we are trying to act like a startup. We have assets, boats that are fully amortized, and we are trying to put them on use here so that the operating costs for the first years are very low, just to prove our point. Because the idea of a waterway for public transportation has been floating around, if you'll excuse the play of words, in Geneva for a very long time, but nobody has done it yet. So we need just to prove that it's possible, to prove that there is interest, and if we can get the bankers that live on this shore and work on that one, if we can get them on board in the literal and in all sense, in all meanings of the term, then we're kind of sure that for the next steps and funding a zero-emission boat one day will be better set. So, and the second step would be clearly the design and construction of a new boat. That's why we are a proud partner of this conference here. We are sure there is a large and huge potential in public transportation, on waterways, decarbonization too. And of course, we have kind of specific needs. It's very different from large shipping boats. It's very different from private-owned leisure boats. but we are certain that this higher capital expenditure will be made possible if we reach commercial success. It doesn't mean that we will be able to fund it all from the market, but we will unlock some of the possibilities to have funding to external funding, because we will have proven that there is demand. So we are going at it with, we are trying to harvest something like a threefold potential in decarbonization, which is the big thing we are all talking about today. The first thing is demonstrating the potential of waterway commuting is a good thing, because we are encouraging through this public actors to, and public bodies and private actors to at least consider capital expenditure and opening new lines in this field. And this is always good, even though the boat isn't fully zero emission powered at the beginning, because you are gaining efficiency if you drive people away from the car into any kind of public mass transit. So we are also working to increasing the modal share of public transportation as a whole, because people will get on our boat with the bus, with the train. They will take the train on that side of the lake. The station is only a few meters away from where the boats will arrive. So we want to offer something like a seamless and integrated experience. Taking the boat should not be something special. It should be integrated into your journey to work or back. And then we are also trying to encourage active mobility. We have special assets in this field, as I said before. Bike transportation, scooters transportation is a very hard problem for most mass transit systems. It's not for us, because we can build boats with enough room to take the bike and the scooter with you. And this is very good to foster the potential of what's now called among experts active mobility, which is any kind of mobility assisted or not by an electrical engine, where you have to be active physically. So this is walking, of course, but also riding a bike or using your scooter. So, okay, I hope you see that there is a lot to be seen and a lot of new markets to be opened, actually, that we then will have to decarbonate, so to speak. We are very proud to be a partner of this conference. For this reason, we are a very small player in this field, but would be very happy to foster innovation in Switzerland too. And that's maybe my last point. Projects like this also help to open the horizon here in Switzerland, which is not a maritime country, which is not turned spontaneously towards the sea and shipping, at least not in the greater public. It's opening new fields of technological innovation that have made the success of Switzerland before to new propulsion systems on water. So I hope this has been enjoyable for you all. I'm very happy that you will be, I think, numerous to join us on the Savoie afterwards. It's a steamboat. It's not very good on the carbon side, but I can promise you the sights inside and the sights outside are memorable. So I hope you will enjoy the trip tonight and the dinner. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Benoît. Very, very interesting. And as anyone here knows, if they've ever crossed the Pont de Mont Blanc, an alternative is very, very interesting indeed. And I guess you get a few less traffic jams than we're used to with your boats. On that point, does anybody have any questions regarding this? And as Benoît says, this evening there will be the cruise on the boat on the lake, which is always a very, very, very enjoyable experience. Do we have any questions at all? No, I think we're doing quite well. I do have, I think that in that case, I'd like to say thank you very much for your presentation. It's very, very interesting. Please join me in saying thank you to Benoît.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to move on, and we're going to be listening to Frank talking to us from Siemens Energy. And so he's going to be talking to us about fuel cell and battery solutions to reduce carbon emissions of vessel operations. Please welcome Frank to the stage.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Frank Beckmann from Siemens Energy. I'm based in Hamburg. So we are providing system solutions for propulsion systems in the scale of starting with battery operated small ferries, small propulsion power, up to a big scale of propulsion for cruise ships in the range of 20 megawatts per shaft line. I'm here to, showing the solutions based on a container ship, what we investigated, and show alternative solutions to increase the efficiency of operating the ships. So mainly talking to the operators and ship owners, these questions are mainly asked. How will I operate my fleet in the future to meet environmental regulations? When is the right time to invest in new technologies to stay competitive in the cargo market? How do I plan my new builds in terms of using technology which can be adapted to meet environmental regulations? I think that's the main topics of today's and tomorrow's discussions here, really. And so the next slide showing the development of moving from fossil fuels to carbon-reduced fuels, which was also shown several times today. So today we have MDO, heavy fuel operated vessels, LNG, and the plan is really within 30 years to come to a scenario where biological fuels are widely used. Batteries will be one part also as energy source for ship operation, but this will be more for smaller ferries or tugboats in the harbor areas or big cities. And then we have this so-called synthetic fuels, ammonia and methanol, which will be a portion of the fuel in the future. So the next one, this is showing actually come to this case study what we prepared. So this is a typical load profile for a large container ship. You have electric load on the ship in the range of 2 megawatts to 5.5 megawatts, and about 1 megawatt will be used for your machinery load, run your machinery equipment, and the rest will be used for reefers. So this combination or this percentage is defining really the optimal scenario for using a shaft generator solution, which is rated for 3 megawatts. What does this work here? Yeah, 3 megawatts. And normally when you reach 90% of your load of the shaft generators, you would start auxiliary genset. So this would be an ideal case also to cover the 1 megawatt which is used for the machinery system by a battery installation. So 350 kilowatt hours would be sufficient to be safe really with the shaft generator installation, and you can load the shaft generator to 100%, and you still have the secure energy source of batteries available in case of a failure to cover the basic load for your ship operation. And also it's possible to even go above the 100% of PTO power with the battery installation. So you would be able then maybe 10% to increase the load using the battery capacity, And when your load drops in your electric network, you would be able to charge the batteries again. So this combination, I think it's the quite good solution to come to a better efficiency point for the overall electric installation of your ship. So this is the overview. Actually, our system solution for these applications will be based on so-called Blue Drive Plus C. It's a multi-drive system on a DC distribution. And you would have then your auxiliary engines would be speed variable. So you would operate them always in the best efficiency point depending on the load. You would have some battery installations in parallel, and that would enable you to skip one installation of auxiliary genset, because they are really we have the approval from the classification that batteries can be used as energy source instead of a generator set. Here in this case, you have your shaft generator driven by the two-stroke engine in so-called PTI, PTO, power take off, power take in. So you run it as a motor or generator. In motor mode, you can apply additional torque to the shaft line, and generator mode, you feed your electric system. Shore connection is also quite easy to adapt to this solution. You are also frequency independent, so you can adapt to 50 or 60 hertz networks in the harbor, so that's also possible. And alternatively, we have now the fuel cell solution also, which are including in this arrangement, in this system concept, where I'm coming later to also. So this is just showing an overview, when does it start, of the different consumers again. So you have your subgrids, auxiliary supply, thruster, and shaft generator, PTI. The distribution network, Blue Drive Plus C, that's the energy distribution. So you are able to, your energy source will be variable speed gensets, and the shaft generator, PTO, you are able to connect batteries to this system, and alternatively also fuel cells. And there the fuels are also discussed today. We have, so here it's shown ammonia, LOHC is one for small ferries, also one fuel which is discussed, and pure H2 as a fuel. So of course for this ammonia and LOHC, you have your reforming in between to operate this fuel cells, but the advantage is ammonia and methanol can be used for two-stroke engines and is on board already, so this fuel can be also used for emission-free operation in harbors using the fuel cell technology, so that can be also adapted to the electric supply system. So everything will be controlled by our energy management system and Ecomain suite. So all this energy delivering components like diesel engines, batteries, and fuel cells. So batteries, charging, discharging cycles will be controlled of the batteries and will operate them in the most efficient areas. Fuel cells have also some with partial load, they are operating in a better efficiency point. And then in addition, your variable speed generators also, which are depending on the load, working on different RPMs. So this is our solution for the batteries. We have our own battery solution within Siemens Energy. So it's a modular system. One cabinet is 60 kilowatt hours. They are water-cooled cells. So you have a kind of piping system here for the water cooling based on lithium-ion technology. And these cells are absolutely safe. So even if you have a thermal runaway for one cell, it's not spreading within the cabinet. So this is you have an exhaust duct in the bottom of the cabinet for the toxic fumes that can be guided to avoid. And so we have about 40 references now for this system being integrated in this Blue Drive Plus C concept, mostly for ferries. The largest installation is 5 megawatts we have, and so this is already quite accepted in the market. And this is our solution for fuel cell power supply. We have here a cooperation with PowerCell in Sweden. So on the right side here you see the marine solution for this PowerCell integration. We are using 2 of this 100 kilowatt modules. So one cabinet will be 200 kilowatt supply, and all the auxiliaries will be handled within the system, so air cleaning and some compressors for the hydrogen, so that can be then adapted to the electric network. So coming now, just an overview of the fuels which are discussed for the fuel cells at the moment. Compressed hydrogen, I'm involved in a project to decarbonize the shipping of the Rhine area in Germany. So there, compressed hydrogen is the preferred fuel. So they're talking about containerized solutions to bring this on board. It's a concept which is discussed at the moment. Liquid hydrogen, we are talking also to MAN Cryo in this sense. They have tanks available for a fixed installation on board. So that is also a possibility there. LOHC can be stored in your normal bunker tanks. There are no requirements. And methanol and ammonia. Methanol is also the tank structure can be used at your ships. So this is, I think, the advantage of this fuels. So the fuel cell efficiency is shown here at about 50%. But then for the synthetic fuels, you have also the reforming process here, which of course takes some efficiency off. So as discussed also today, and the first ships will operate on methanol in the future. So there would be an option also to use fuel cells for emission-free operation of container ships in the future in a harbor area or emission-free areas. So this is showing the energy density again. What we do also with the customer is having a look on the CAPEX and OPEX. The present situation, I must admit, is a bit difficult. But I think there will be, as this is widely, or as soon as this is widely used in the market, of course the price will come down. In the bottom you see here, depending on the operating profile, the battery installation. Then we have the fuel cell in the middle, or genset directly operated by synthetic fuels, your electric installation, and then this is the tanks for compressed hydrogen, here liquid hydrogen. LOHC is just in the beginning to be discussed. That's more a guess here what it will cost. This is not available really at the market. And then methanol, also you need a reforming process for that. And the OPEX is also quite, I think there will be significant changes in the future. So at the moment, it's using synthetic fuels or pure hydrogen on the ship. It's in the factor of 3 approximately compared to diesel. But with the introduction or the rise of CO2 tax, this will increase probably, and hopefully the hydrogen price will come down and makes it more attractive to invest in these technologies. Okay, coming back to the questions, I think that was discussed also in the panel before. So the discussions we have with the ship owners are really the fuel need to be there, the infrastructure before they do the investment. And so that will be the basis really to bring this technologies with fuel cells at least forward. And but the basic message is that the technology is there, and so it need to be through funding or something really possible to make it attractive for the ship owners. Okay, thank you. That was my part. You have, yeah, some.
Please stay for a second.
Yeah.
And first of all, do we have any questions from the audience? I think it's very interesting to hear about all the steps you're making and the fact we're actually moving forward with these batteries and these electric solutions. In terms of large questions, just a quick question for you. In terms of large vessels, do you see this as being an immediate potential solution, or is it a part of the solution?
I mean, as shown, shaft generator and battery installation is ready to use now. So that is really also on the return of investment calculations we did for some projects. It's attractive solutions which can be used now. So integration of fuel cells, that's depending really on the fuel and reforming technology. So there's some time, I think, before this can be installed in the large scale. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Any questions before we do move on to the panel discussion? I think you've explained it very, very well, so everyone has all the information they need. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Frank.
Thank you.
So now we're going to be moving on, and we have a panel discussion. And so this is basically looking at a wide range of knowledge. We're looking at the interesting topic of beyond concept, the complete ship electrification as a reality. And so if you just wait 2 seconds, and we have, first of all, I'll ask the panelists to join me on the stage. We'll take our seat. But before we do start our discussion, we will have Mr. Anil Srivastava, who is the CEO of Lake Geneva, and he will be giving us a presentation in order to explain what we're talking about and some of the experience that he's had in this sector. So if you could please welcome the panelists and also Anil to the stage.
On n'a pas l'ordre. Il avait dit qu'il y avait l'ordre, mais il n'y a pas l'ordre. C'est pas grave. Désormais... Looking for the order. All set?
Please.
Ready to go? Bonjour à tous. Can you all hear me? Very good. Very good. I've been given 10 minutes or so to kind of set the context for this panel discussion. There are some very experienced people who will share a lot more insight and knowledge than I have, but I want to share our experience with you. Well, in the interest of time, I'll save you the details of Lake Geneva. everybody can find it out from company's website. But in summary, what I would like to start off by saying that we are your company, we are the local company. We have been in existence for something close to 111 years, and we continue to do one thing in all these years, which is building batteries. Best-in-class batteries. That's what we did 110 years back. That's what we do today. We operate essentially in 3 business units. One focuses on all aspects of transport, electrification of transport. The second aspect is we continue to build specialized batteries for applications such as defense. Arma Swiss is our customer, as an example. And the third bit is complementary to transport. We call energy storage systems, stationary energy storage system. What it means is building clean infrastructure for charging and making e-mobility happen. Let's get to the presentation. I guess you will hear a lot. You have heard a lot this morning as well in the agenda that there is an ambitious target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by the year 2050 compared to 2008. And if you compare to the 1990s level, it's pretty much reducing by 100%. So there is a tall order in front of us just on greenhouse gas emissions, but oftentimes people forget that there is other aspects of pollution, NOx, SOx. Air pollution is a major cause of, unfortunately, death around the world, especially in busy cities around the port. So one of the key solutions to get to this target would be, not the only one, but one of the key solutions would be to use electrification energy storage systems to go towards zero emissions. Look at this. Here is the experience of Le Creuset on few of the slides. Here is a project we have just delivered to our customer in Finland in this case. This is the impact of using a LNG battery hybrid. And the numbers compare you with a diesel ferry if you had in 2018 versus what is being or will be achieved by this Vasa line ferry, which we have powered 100% with our batteries. The numbers speak for themselves. They are compelling. The point we would like to make on using these examples is essentially the fact that we don't need to wait for the world to change in 2030 or 2050. The world can be changed today progressively. We need to get there. Oftentimes, I've been asked the question, is electrification nice to have, green painting, green washing, or is it commercially viable? The answer is, it is commercially viable. Our customer is here. He will speak more about this project than we do, LN Electric Ferry, but the numbers speak for themselves, not only on the targets we achieve on greenhouse gas emission reduction, but also the economic part of it. Graph to your right has 3 different colors. It may not be obvious to you. It says all diesel, or if you have diesel and battery hybrid, or you have all electric. Okay, for the all electric implementation, we have done for the customer LN Ferry in Denmark. You'll hear more about the project from the panel. The payback period, officially informed by the customer, is between 4.5 years to 5.5 years. How long the ferry is designed for? You know it. So it is economically viable. Those were the 2 quick examples to show why we should embark on electrification today, not wait for the great battery technology to come, but whenever in 2030, then we will start electrification. The technology today is good enough to start in a very competitive, economically viable case. And we say that on the basis of number of implementations we have done around the world, and these are the few examples of it. I don't know how to work this. Yeah, it works. Okay. So this is the project we've just talked about. I'll skip the details because there's an expert here. Let's just talk about a few other things we did. For Grimaldi, this is a diesel and Le Creuset battery hybrid. Can you imagine the size of the battery? Is 5 megawatt hours of batteries, and it is hybrid. 5 megawatt hours of batteries. These are large batteries. We, along with our partner Kongsberg Maritime, we created this mode in our architecture called zero emissions in port. So if you look at Grimaldi's vessels operating between Italy and Spain, particularly going to Barcelona, you'll see these beautiful Grimaldis going. When they pull to closer to Barcelona, all electric, complete silent, zero pollution. That's in operation today. We have delivered 7 of them. 5 of them are in operation as we speak. There are many other applications we have delivered in the sector, essentially to make it a point. You can do economically viable case for all electric ferry, all cargo vessels, hybrids, all of the above. The current technology, according to our experience, it is good enough for about 50 nautical miles in one charge, 90 kilometers type of runtime. Beyond that, I don't think it is sensible still to use battery because it becomes too heavy, both in weight and volumetric dimension. Our vision to zero emissions from the maritime sector is a combination of the two things. First, a holistic approach on electrification of vessels, whether it is all electric or in between hybrid or combining clean gas engine and batteries. But equally important is for ports to evolve the infrastructure. I mentioned to you just now the size of the battery in Grimaldi. Imagine 5 Grimaldi coming, 25 megawatt. 10 coming, 50 megawatt. There is no port I am aware of which is designed for that scaling today. About 54% of the ports in Europe have high power electricity connection. Otherwise, they are all low and medium power. So the port infrastructure needs to come up alongside of electrification of vessels in order for us to achieve our objective towards zero emissions. If you thought I was just talking about concepts, no, that's the purpose of this panel. It is the reality. With our customer, Damen Shipyard in the Netherlands, we have built 2 all-electric ferries to operate on Ontario Lake, Canada. At the same time, we have built the energy infrastructure at the port to charge these ferries in a dynamic, intelligent fashion. So ladies and gentlemen, it is a reality. The panel members will do a much better job in taking you through the depth of why it's no longer concept. Electrification is here, and we can do this in a competitive fashion today. Hope this was a quick introduction, which will help the panel session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anil. It's always a pleasure listening to Anil give his presentations, and it's really a bit of a glimpse into the future of what we can expect within shipping. So we're going to move on to our panel discussion now, and the title of the panel discussion is Beyond Concept, Complete Ship Electrification as a Reality. And this is something that I think is very exciting, and it'd be interesting to hear what the panelists have to say. On the panel today, I have 4 experts, and so to my right, I have Dennis, and then Guillaume, and Andreas, and Halfdan. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask them each just to introduce themselves very briefly, because then they can also introduce themselves an awful lot better than I can introduce them, and tell us who they are, what they're doing, and a little bit of their area of expertise. So I'll start off with Dennis, please.
Thanks. My name is Dennis Greenspan. I'm the CEO of DYG Energy, and I'm also the business consultant for Aspen Kempton Associates, based in Canada. I've spent the last 2 decades to electrify ships, a lot in the offshore industry, but also in the cruise industry, and also on container ships with PTO, PTI, as it was well presented by my former competitor from Siemens. And that's really me as of today.
Excellent. Thank you very much. If we move on, Guillaume.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Guillaume Clement. I work at Le Clancher. I am the vice president for their marine organization. I'm based in Norway, and I come with 15 years of experience in electrification of ships in different parts of the world, recently China, and recently more recently in Norway, where our business is obviously not only big but growing.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Guillaume. And Andreas, if you could introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Andreas Kindlemann. I'm from Switzerland myself, from Zurich. I did a naval architecture degree. I'm a naval architect living in Bern for 20 years. I've got my company and designing mainly passenger ferries for the lakes and commercial craft for Switzerland and a good portion of them electric.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Glad to have you with us. And Halfdan, if I could ask you.
Yeah, my name is Halfdan Abrahamsen, and I work for the municipality of Ærø in Denmark. And what is special about the municipality of Ærø is that it's an island that has a long tradition of working with renewable energy. And the e-ferry Ellen is sort of the latest thing that the island has produced. And it has been a very special project to be part of.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Pleasure to have you with us. And so, in fact, starting off with Halfdan, I'd just like to ask you, I mean, you're operating these ferries at the moment. Can you make a financial case for electric ferries with what you've experienced so far?
Yes, Neil already showed a graph where you can see, if you study it closely, that after 4 to 8 years, you will actually start seeing savings, even though the initial cost of buying a fully electric ship is still a bit more expensive. And that's from an evaluation report, so it was projections. But I can say that our projections, they did not turn out wrong. Actually, we are a bit above curve. We sail 22 nautical miles between charges, and we sail one round trip, 22 nautical miles, with 1,600 kilowatt hours. So that's about a fifth of what we would spend if we built a new, similarly capable diesel ferry. So that's one major thing right there.
Okay, I mean, the figures basically speak for themselves.
Yeah, and then also there are crew reductions because the electrical systems are so simple that we actually don't need to sail with an engineer on board. And then there's the added benefit that we can pull the electricity directly from our own wind turbines. So we don't spend money sailing fuel or generating fuel of any kind. That's not part of the evaluation report. It's just one thing that's worth mentioning. When we sail fully electric, we can take the electricity directly, and so we don't waste energy on conversion processes.
Excellent. Sounds like an awful lot of positives. I'd like to come back into a number of the things there, but moving on, Andreas, as your experience as a naval architect, how does integrating batteries into ships compare to fossil fuel solutions?
Yeah, thank you. The most important thing is obviously the sizing of the batteries. It's relatively easy to have a diesel reservoir bigger than the one you have at the moment, but increasing the size of the battery is quite crucial. And so it depends on the specifications of each craft. Whether you have a craft that crosses the lake here, Lake of Geneva, 15 times a day, back and forth, always on the same track, the same amount of people on board, same load, it's much more easier, obviously, to size your battery than if you have a boat that has 7 or 8 different routes to do, plus then go up to Bouveret and come back again for a special service. Then it's much more difficult to size the battery. I think that's the main difference that challenges are.
It's interesting. A lot of the issues you're describing sound similar to the problems with bunkering a vessel with LNG. It's
Same
as
thing.
soon as you have a set route, then it all becomes a lot easier to handle. A lot of things I'd like to dive into in more detail there, but I'd also like to bring everyone else into the conversation. Guillaume, you recently moved from Schneider. What brought you into the battery industry?
Good question. I would say that the most thing for me was to have a significant positive impact, positive contribution to the environment. And I saw battery as the real true solution for the challenge that we have today. I mean, as we say rightly today, in this panel, the solutions exist, they've been implemented, they are being operated. We have the return on experience that shows that it works. So with that new position of mine at Le Clancher, I have the opportunity to help the environment with a significant positive contribution right now. That's what drives me into this business.
Excellent. Well, it makes a lot of sense, and it's interesting how over the last couple of years this whole conversation has gone from something nice to be to something which is absolutely essential for all of our future, and certainly if we have children, then we get this from them as well. I certainly get it from my children when anything to do with plastics or anything to do with water wastage or anything like that. It's amazing how much of an issue it is, even at a young age. Just moving on, Dennis, obviously you're experienced a bit on the offshore side. How has the ship's overall electrical architecture evolved with batteries?
I think the most important thing is batteries deliver direct current, and over the last 20 years, most of the vessels that were using alternative current, with 60 or 50 hertz. Now with batteries, we see a bit more and more DC current distributed systems where the batteries get connected with power electronics directly, removing transformers, making the vessel more, let's say, easier to integrate into the system. I think that's one of the biggest changes that we are seeing, and also new alternative solutions. We see some vessels looking at solar panels with DC current, and that also can be brought into the system in an easy way.
Okay, so I guess it's going back to what Halfdan was saying earlier as well about you need less people to manage the systems. They're simpler.
You need, I wouldn't say maybe less people, but at least you will need a different type of skills on board the vessel, because they don't operate the same way. And people, when they go to on a vessel with an engine, they learn what an engine looks like. When they were at school, when they see a box, they don't really know what to do. Therefore, there is a lot of training and to do with the crew on board, at least for more complex vessels. I think a ferry, when you go back and forth, you can sail without the people because you'll be on the other side, and you've got lots of redundancy built in with the battery system.
Okay, and is there sufficient opportunities for this training at the moment?
I think the vendors are providing a lot of training, but it's the operational training which needs to be built up over time based on experience, and therefore I think this needs to be brought up into the maritime schools as well.
Okay, I'm sure it's being developed at the moment. Andreas, just moving back to you, I mean, in terms of the different naval architecture projects you have, are a significant portion involving battery technology?
Yes, well, I have to say I started 2003, it was, where we designed the first electric ferry here on the lake, fully electric ferry. But this was for 60 passenger, and this was already big at the time, lead batteries and old school stuff. But from then, it moved on quite significantly. And now, today, I'm having about 40 to 50% of my projects that I'm involved in at the moment are pure electric. And the pre-projects, and this is much more important to me, it's even more. It's more like 60% there, that people now really think, and even bigger boats for 500 passengers and so on the lakes, that they want to build them fully electric.
And I guess that percentage is more the case for you're working on specific sizes of vessels, obviously.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And Halfdan, just moving back towards you, in terms of these ferries you've been operating, I mean, have there been any unexpected benefits you've seen from operating electric ferries?
I would say that the evaluation report was really thorough. We looked at everything because we're using taxpayer money, and politicians decide what ferries we are going to order, and they want all ferries to be completely emission-free by 2035. But you could say that, to be honest, perhaps we're a little bit surprised that we haven't really had any problems, because we were treading new territory. We broke the world record 7 times distance-wise when we built it. And also a lot of locals who are maritime people, they were skeptical. But they have all come around because the sailing experience is excellent. It's smooth, smog-free. But perhaps I've been surprised how much media we have gotten. And perhaps these days, when you say your children, they expect sustainability and environmental responsibility. I think it's a good case. It's a good way of selling your operations if you can truly show that you actually have made a change. But we have gotten so much attention from media. Actually, CGN, there were two guys from CGN who came to visit us just to see the vessel. It's great being here now and being able to sail with them tonight.
Excellent. I mean, I think it's very, very interesting. You said zero emissions by 2035. Is battery-powered ferries the only path to that, or are other solutions being put in place?
We don't know yet because, like I said, it's a political decision, so there's a long time to 2035. But the current politicians have set themselves that goal, and it's my office who needs to find the solutions to that. Although we have a ferry director, it's a little bit complicated in political organizations, but he is basically the guy who makes the decisions. And I'm not completely sure what his mind is at this point. But he knows that the politician have set these expectations.
It's always fun when somebody sets a directive and then you have to make everything happen for it to work.
Exactly, that's his job, yeah.
Exactly. Moving back to Guillaume, from your experience, can you just outline some of the challenges in creating battery systems for a marine vessel?
It's a very good question. I would say I mean, there's a lot of challenges. You could talk about the environment, you could talk about the regulation, you could talk about the technology. I think the biggest challenge we have is to all together, I mean, with everyone in this room and outside this room, is to collaborate. Someone once told me, we partner where we can and we fight where we must. And so I invite everyone to reflect on not only just their own competencies, but to also reflect on their own limitation and on the competencies that others have. How do those other competencies are complementary to theirs? Because no one will solve the dilemmas of today's by their own. It's by partnering that we will find the solutions. And I think the panel that we have today is a good example of that. It's by working all together that we found solutions and that we've been proving solutions. And I think this is the biggest challenge that we have. I'm confident we can. We have bigger challenges than we had before, but we have better people, we have better knowledge, better technology to leverage from. But this is the challenge, I think, building up those partnerships.
I certainly hear you as far as collaboration is concerned, and it seems to be a bit of a theme throughout the conference so far today, where we're talking about the importance of everyone talking and bringing together their different areas of competencies to build something greater together. Andreas, just coming back to the naval architecture point of view, in terms of designing vessels which are designed for freshwater or salt water, what are the constraints from your point of view?
Well, one of the problems that might arise is the cooling of the batteries, where we can here take the lake water straight out of the lake to have it in a heat exchanger and then into the batteries. And in all the terms, the corrosion of all the components on board, which is always an issue with electrical installations, is certainly much more severe on a sea. That's about the two things that I can think of right now.
Okay. It's interesting because I've quite a lot of experience involved with shipping, mainly across the oceans, but also a little bit within the Great Lakes in America. And you tend to deal with ships which are much, much older in the Great Lakes. They last a lot longer. A ship which is 30 years old on the ocean is very old, whereas in the Great Lakes it can be quite a bit older and still operating very well. Dennis, just moving back to you, in terms of challenges of battery integration, I mean, it must be quite difficult integrating everything into the ship itself.
Especially now where a lot of the projects are refurbishment of vessels, where the system are existing, therefore for new builds, as Guillaume said, it's a partnership. We work with ship designers, we work with electrical integrators, with battery manufacturers, and we can find the best way to integrate them into the system. If it's water-cooled batteries, like Le Clancher, you can integrate them in a very small space compared to air-cooled systems. But one of the things which I think was mentioned earlier on is how to look at the safety aspect of those batteries. And a lot of the vendors have made lots of work to integrate those batteries for thermal runaway of those batteries, how to evacuate the gas if there is a gas dispersion, and all those things. Therefore, that's on the electrical side, it's more on the intelligence on how to use a battery. And there is a lot of battery management system which has been developed for peak shaving, load leveling, static generators like the ferries where you replace the full diesel genset. But it's all this intelligence of this energy management system which is the importance. The other things I would say is from my offshore background, understanding the operational profile and not looking at the load list of what loads you have on board your vessel is really important. Because a lot of the loads are only used at 20%. There is more and more variable frequency drive on board. Those VFDs, they have DC buses where you can connect batteries and you can easily integrate batteries where the load is instead of having to have a centralized battery system.
Okay. It's interesting, you touched on a point there regarding safety. And you also have the difference between the reality and also public perception. And so, in fact, just throwing this back to you, Halfdan, but I'd be interested in the other comments as well. In terms of public perception of safety, has this been an issue? Have people expressed concern? I mean, a bit of an extreme example, I'm going back to the Samsung phone issue that we had on planes, where everyone was suddenly terrified because I think we had a couple of phones out of, I don't know how many thousands of millions around the world that had a problem. Is this something you've encountered and have you worked towards?
Well, we were quite concerned with the psychological barriers. And I also remember, I mean, it's a small island, like I said, everyone knows everyone. So I've experienced walking around, are you sure that ferry is going to be okay in high winds? I'm not really sure I want to sail with that ferry. But we have all I can say is that I think we have demonstrated for locals that she is very safe, and we actually feel that the e-ferry is more safe than our old diesels. The energy density is lower in the batteries, which is a benefit in that aspect. You can't lose fuel supply in an electric ferry because everything is bolted in. But I haven't thought too much about it recently because it's not an issue any longer. And to go back to your previous question, we are definitely going to build electric in the future. We will have to build new models to upscale, but whether they will be, there also will be other, for instance, liquid fuels on board. That's possible depending on if we can live up to the service level we want.
Okay.
But we're certainly not concerned about public perception or passenger perception. They want more electric ferries now.
Okay, that's good to hear. In fact, I'd just like to bring you in, Andreas, in this the same point, because obviously with the design, this is quite important, and often it's people's fear of the unknown, which is often more of an issue than any actual real life fear. It's fear of not. I mean, people talking about driverless cars and how they're scared of accidents, and it's like, well, actually, they're probably a lot safer than us humans. But is this something that comes in the architecture side?
Obviously, yeah. Especially the people in the marine industry are mostly a bit traditional, and they don't like too much changes anyway. And I mean, it's the same thing as the diesel cars came in when you had horses. Everybody said you can't ever have those cars here. It's a bit the same thing. But as soon as, and this is probably also because of the car industry that really boosts a lot right now, that in the perception of the general public, electric transportation is more common. It's possible. It's actually very well possible. And this starts also to change the mind of our customers. I think that's in the last few years we had a strong increase because of that. But having said that, it is a slight problem in terms of legislation actually that we have here in Switzerland, because the legislation is always a step behind the actual development of the batteries. And so we are in a bit of a gray area there.
Okay, it's interesting. In fact, just and coming along to you, Guillaume. I mean, this is obviously something you often talking to your clients and talking. They're taking the decision whether to implement these systems. Is the safety aspect a big part of these discussions, or is it more related purely to cost efficiencies or moving into the future? Is this something you end up discussing about a lot?
Yes, yes, we do. We do, and actually, it's at the heart of how we do things. We invest a lot in our resource, and we invest a lot in our unique verticalized supply chain. We do the design and the manufacturing of the complete system, the cell and the module, and this is where we invest. We also invest a lot in total cost of ownership, offering solutions for the ports as well as for the offshore solutions. So that's extremely important to understand. And of course, as we own the manufacturing and the R&D of our own product entirely, we spend a significant amount of time making sure they are the safest on the market. So we have been very selective in the solutions we have embedded within our solutions, and we welcome customers to challenge us because it makes us better, and it has made us better. So today we have a very safe solution. Absolutely.
Excellent, thank you very much. I've got a number of other questions for you. However, on that note, I would like to see whether there are any questions from the audience. We do have one question that's come up on Slido, but before we go to that, there's a question at the back there. If I could ask Bernard, if you could kindly give a microphone to the gentleman there with his hand up.
Yes. Hello, this is Michael Art speaking. I have actually two questions. One is there a battery technology breakthrough coming that, I mean, hybrid solutions is very clear, we're very familiar with that, but is there a battery technology breakthrough coming that will make, for example, short sea shipping purely with batteries a feasible solution for short sea applications? I'm from Wärtsilä, so we need to assess if the competition is stepping in. And the second question that I have is there also, what is the development when it comes to dependency on certain materials, these rare earth materials which are needed for batteries, when the scale up in electric driving is going on, and when marine is also stepping in, there's enormous amount of resources needed for that. So two questions, I don't know.
Thank you very much. Excellent questions. I'm actually going to start with the first. The second is actually something I had on my list, because we talk about lithium an awful lot, and I understand that actually Afghanistan is has one of the biggest deposits of lithium. But the first question was, are there any battery breakthroughs that we are looking at on the horizon?
I can answer this one. As I said just earlier, we are unique and we differentiate ourselves at Leclanché by owning the R&D and our own factory here in Europe, Germany and Switzerland. And indeed, we are releasing new products. If it's not every month, every 6 months, we are releasing new product, new cell, new modules, new full systems. I would not be in the position to disclose many of those. But indeed, we are getting better and better, better economically, better in performance, and better in the variety of the solutions we can offer, depending on the cell and the application. Fire propagation is definitely one of them. It would just be a bit harder to disclose a bit more, but it's definitely getting a lot better, and this is why we are engaging discussions with many more ship owners and many more applications than we did in the past. We're talking with container ship liners, we're talking with tankers, we're talking with offshore platform, wind farm generation offshore, and this is the reason, because indeed there are breakthroughs coming. We, to some extent, I hope it answers your question.
I mean, and just take the question a little bit further. I mean, obviously, you're constantly doing research and development to try and improve the battery technology. I guess at the moment we are, very much limited. I mean, on a ferry it works very well. On smaller vessels it works well, where it's quite short routes. But a lot of people are interested in upscaling massively. So then we're talking about ocean-going vessels. I guess for that, and this is not asking you to reply necessarily on behalf of Leclanché, but it's more just, you all three have a lot better knowledge of the industry than I do. Do do you think that we might be seeing something over the horizon which does significantly change the way these batteries work and the power of them? And this is just thoughts I've done.
I was just previous today in the other discussion panel. Mrs. McLean was talking about charging at sea, generating hydrogen, I believe, near wind parks. And that was something I mentioned a couple years ago to one of my colleagues, and she started laughing. So she said, that's never going to happen. But we have all these wind parks. Why not charge right at the wind park? For instance, if you look at the North Sea, Denmark has wind parks far out into the ocean. England has also. I mean, it's obvious if you could tank there. The reason my colleague started laughing was that one of the crucial aspects of sailing fully electric and maintaining a high service, not getting people laid across, is getting an excellent connection from the charger. And of course, if you're out in the North Sea in pretty harsh environment, then getting a good connection might be difficult and might be crucial. I mean, but like I say, you can dock 2 spaceships. You can probably build a charger that can connect from a wind turbine. And I think actually I saw Horizon 2020 project recently, where it was part of the scope of the project to investigate if you could tank from a wind turbine. But apart from that, getting enough energy when you are in port, if you really start upscaling, could be a problem, especially in places with a poor grid or not enough energy. We are blessed with a very good grid because we have been doing innovative energy projects for many years in Ærø with local people. But you could, for instance, have a battery pack on shore besides the transformers from the grid, to give the charger a big kick, say fill up the batteries while the vessel is away, and then having that surplus when it gets across. I don't know what the upper limits are, but the last record has not been broken, that's for sure.
I do very much like your point there, that some things that we hear and we laugh at suddenly actually turn into quite a practical solution and quite a good idea. And it's just the fact that it just takes a little bit of time to actually find ways of doing them. We have a couple of questions actually come up on Slido here, and so I'd like to move on to those. The first question is, the first question that came up was, what is the average life of electric batteries in marine applications?
Yep.
Does someone want to jump in on that?
I can probably answer this one. So we basically design them as per the requirement. Having the best-in-class product on the market, not only by design, they would go a lot longer, but we would design them accordingly. What is helping today's world, and it's not just the batteries, it's the IoT. We can collect a lot of data from the equipment, and we can make sure they are being operated as per what they've been designed for. So with that data, we can anticipate any failure. We can also monitor them and give advices to the end user as to what they should be doing to be operating them the best way possible. So the lifetime of the battery, we are limited more by what the customers are asking. This is our problem. We could offer 15, 20 years, if not longer, by designing them accordingly. We often ask to offer 10 years, and that's a very common way of doing things today.
So I guess they're more likely to become obsolete than to actually not work anymore. You're probably going to have more technologies that replace them and lighter batteries. On that subject, in fact, there was the second question that came out there was in terms of the materials that are used for batteries. And this is something that I would be interested, because we're talking about batteries for a lot of different applications around the world. And is this something that you expect us to actually have a bit of an issue over the next couple of years in terms of supply of the materials that are being used? Thoughts?
I can take a word on that. We don't expect to see a shortage of lithium compared to the demand. I think that it will just slow down the drop in price, let's say, that you can see or expect in that market. A lot of the lithium, let's say, mine in the world, they've been bought by the automotive industry. But we see that the automotive industry is also thinking those batteries is the right way. I was at the Nitrogen Forum last week, and even Stellantis is trying to move towards fuel cell in some way. And I think it's going to be a mix of energy. And I think we will average all of that, and we don't see any shortage of lithium, at least for the next 5 to 10 years, even with the demand increasing. At least that's my...
Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Otherwise, we've got a couple of other questions. I'm assuming that answers the question that we had back there. And so, otherwise, can you comment in terms of fully electric vessels and the sustainability issues regarding battery disposal? Important question, because obviously it's great to have small emissions while we're actually using them, but what's the end consequence? Halfdan?
Well, I would just say that speaking from an environmental point, that's us as customers of a large battery pack. That was one of our concerns, and it's also one of the concerns of environmentally conscious passengers. But I think, Guillaume, you could probably comment better, but I don't know what are the prospects, do you think? Do you think it's possible to separate the elements?
Well, the first thing we are working on is on using less you use, less you have to recycle.
Starting point.
So if you look at our electrodes and anodes, they are the only ones that are entirely water-based solvent. So not only they provide better electrical performances because they dry very well, but they are made of water, literally, the solvent. This is how we are designing. This is the mindset that we use to design our batteries. Is it perfect today? No. Is it getting better? Yes, and this is what we are working on. Absolutely, we need to get better at. Absolutely.
Excellent.
But it's a general problem at this point, simply. There's no denying it. But what I usually say when people are concerned about the batteries is, well, if you look at an oil well, or what happened in the Mexican Gulf a couple of years ago, where complete fisheries has been put down, you know, what's better, what's worse? I don't know. At least. Yeah, every time you extract minerals, there are going to be problems, simply put.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Otherwise, just another question, and obviously something that's very important to people and the focus of the entire conference, but how does a battery-propelled ship perform compared to a fuel-propelled ship on a greenhouse gas well-to-wake basis? Is this something you have any comments on? Andreas, maybe from the architecture point of view, is this something you've looked into?
No, I have to admit we never looked into that. I can't give you any insight on this one.
No worries, no worries. Anybody else have anything to say on that? Halfdan?
I'm not sure if I'm answering the question actually, but I know that it took us about 3 months to make good on the emissions from battery production.
Okay.
So if we're sailing 10 years on the batteries, 3 of those months are spent paying for the production, you could say.
Okay, which is very interesting. It certainly gives a good answer. We're coming towards the end of the discussion and also to the coffee break. Before we do that, do we have any questions at all from the audience? Anyone got anything they're curious about regarding batteries and how they work, and any other questions? I think in that case, I would like to say a huge thank you to the 4 panelists. Very, very interesting comments. Thank you very much, Dennis. Thank you, Guillaume. Thank you, Andreas. And thank you, Halfdan. Please join me in saying a huge thank you to the panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could please ask you to take your seats again, we're going to get started any moment now. Okay, welcome back everybody. I hope that you had a nice coffee and you're all nicely recharged for the afternoon's final presentations. And so we have 3 more parts of this afternoon. We're going to start off, we're looking at the promise of 30 knots for 30 years with 0 emissions as standard, looking at advanced atomic, and that will be Michael Bau from Core Power. And then we're going to be looking at advanced aero-hydro coupling with VPP analysis for design and engineering of wind-driven ships. And then we're going to end off the day with a discussion. And so we'll be sitting here. I will be joined by Bud and Melissa, Bud from MSC, Melissa from Shell, and we'll be talking about dialogue on decarbonisation and the partnership that they have in place at the moment. So on that note, will you join me please in welcoming Mikkel to the floor, and very interested to hear what he has to say.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for staying for my segment towards the end of the day. The transition that we're all talking about, I actually think it's a transition that's only just started, but it started somewhere slightly different from what we're talking about today. It's a transition that starts with ourselves. It's a transition that effectively we need to go through to understand what it is that we have to do to make the changes that are required, and the realization that we're coming to the end of the Industrial Revolution and something has to take over from where we left off. I think that transition is really one where we need to study and understand and respect the laws of nature. And we need to understand what it is that we're talking about. Rather than talking just about technology or just about solutions for specific problems, we need to understand what it is that we need to do and why we need to do it. Because the climate change crisis is really one of the natural world. If it wasn't for that, it wouldn't be a crisis. So we need to study, understand, and respect the laws of nature. And as a result of that, we need to look at where energy comes from. Where is it? It's not something we make, it's something that exists. It's something that we can extract and use to make power. And how do we do that? We've got the light elements and the heavy elements in general as a sort of 2-factor part of this. In the light elements, the hydrogen end of everything, effectively what we're always going to do is to do more to get less. And on the heavier side of the elements, we can do less and get more. And hence the reemergence of atomic or nuclear as part of the debate about future energy systems. Now, I want to be absolutely clear with you that one of the things that we've been spending most of our time doing for the last 5 years is to drive a wedge between conventional nuclear as you know it, or as you think you know it, and advanced atomic as is being developed. One of the observations that I've made in my 30 years in shipping is that we find ourselves in a real funk. And the funk isn't so much what solution should we pick in order to keep on doing what we're doing. The funk is really, what do we need to understand to make a change? And if we look at it from a very specific point of view, it's a little bit different than what most people do, but it's an interesting way of looking at it. We've got approximately 100,000 vessels on the water. That is everything from 100 gross registered ton up. So it's small, right? But we're talking about everything from small to large ships here today. So I think it's relevant. 100,000 ships, which at their design service speed emit about 1.1 billion. I know it says million. I'm sorry. It's a 1.1 billion tons of carbon dioxide in greenhouse gas emissions. That's at their design service speed. Of those, 7,300 of those 100,000 ships emit just shy of 50% of all the emissions. They consume about 50% of the fuels and 50% of the emissions that are made. 7,300 ships, that's 7.3% of all the ships out there. 17,200 ships, so we're just adding an extra 10,000 ships, and we're at 80%. 80% of emissions from this industry comes from 20% of the ships in the fleet. And conversely, 80% of the fleet makes 20% of the emissions. So in terms of looking at zero, I mean, there are many ways we call it zero. We call it net zero, we call it all sorts of different types of zero. I mean, we're talking about, you know, zero emissions as if it's, if we don't emit carbon, it's zero emissions. That's not true. If you're combusting, you're emitting. There's always some emission from a combustion process. You can't get away from it. It's the law of nature. So I think what we have is we have net zero and we have true zero. True zero is when there are no emissions at all. And if we look at this particular funk that we're in, and we say, if we're going to reduce the emissions from this industry by 50%, why don't we look at the fleet that emits 50% of the emissions? That's 7,300 ships. It's not actually that many ships, but they're awfully large. The largest container ships, bulk carriers, tankers, gas carriers, cruise ships, etc. If we can find a way for them to be self-powered, give them their propulsion means in an electric world without having to use shore power, without having to have some source somewhere else that powers these ships, we can reduce that 50% from the fleet. And it's not actually that hard. But then we've left with the rest. That's 80% of all those other ships, which is 20% of the emission. So we've got two sort of paths to go forward here, and we have to be certain that we understand how to do it. The one thing that struck me about 5 years ago, actually it struck me a little bit earlier, but 5 years ago, was that if we are going to be faced with a never-ending series of regulations that aim to strangle emissions from this industry, we're going to drive ourselves into a ditch. We need to have something that gets us out of that. And the only thing that we actually need is resilience. We need energy that we can rely on, not energy that's intermittent or available when we want it, or sorry, when it's there. We need it all the time when we can have. So resilience is the one thing. And we can only get that from two places. We can get it from fossil fuels, which is what we've got today, which is what's powered the industrial revolution we're in, or we can get it from atomic, from nuclear. But then we need to think nuclear again. We need to think about it in a different way, because what we have at the moment isn't fit for purpose in our industry. Yes, the navies operate on reactors. Yes, there are Russian icebreakers that operate with reactors. And there are certain examples from the past of reactor technology that has done pretty extraordinary things. But it hasn't really been fit for purpose, and it hasn't really taken off because of that reason. It's been uneconomical. It's posed a proliferation risk. It's been politically difficult. It's just been too hard. So new energy technology is what we're looking for. And what we've done is really look at this from shipping's point of view, not from nuclear's point of view. This is not the guys that are developing fantastic new technologies looking for a market where it can be deployed. It is our market looking at what we need and what that technology should look like. So we've been through, and I don't know if you know this, but you might want to take a note of this. If you take all of the various potential designs that you can have of a nuclear reactor, the number is 984. There are 984 different types of nuclear reactors that's possible in theory, but you can lump them together into categories. You can do various things with them, and you can see, well, you can discard certain categories because they're not fit for purpose. I'll show you how to do that. But really, what we're looking for is a new energy technology which solves the problems that we're after. And what we've done is that we've come to the conclusion that there is a technology that will do this. It'll do it almost perfectly for this industry. And it uses salt. It's liquid salt technology. Salt is fantastic in the sense that when you heat it up, it goes liquid. It's about as viscous as water. And it's ionically bonded, which means that it's impervious to any damage from radiation that you might have in a fuel that operates inside it. And if you combine the salt with a nuclear fuel, like uranium, thorium, or something like that, you get this nice mix that keeps itself liquid. And that liquid fuel, of course, can't melt down. And that liquid fuel means that you have got the coolant and the fuel combined into one. So you can't lose the coolant, and you can't have a reactor accident like we've heard about from Russia, the Ukraine, Japan, etc., etc. So really what we've got here is a new way of looking at nuclear, a new way of developing a technology that we can use for shipping. Now, why did we pick the molten salt reactor? Well, these criteria that we set for the industry is really one where we set, the 3 things we need to solve. And the 3 things we need to solve are that extremely difficult political challenge of what about proliferation? What if the material falls into the wrong hands? What if we end up with nuclear material going astray somewhere in the world? And we can solve that if we look at the problem in a particular way. The second one was we need to be able to make sure that this isn't just safe, it's passively safe. So if there's no one left there on board to actually handle the system in the event of an accident or a disaster or something that happens at sea, and we know it happens, then it shuts itself down. It's passively walk away safe. It's like if I had an on button and I pressed it in, and if I wasn't there to press that on button in, the system wouldn't work, like a dead man's switch. And the last thing we need, of course, is we need something that is small. It's like all technology. Look at locomotives, look at computers and telephones, things that started off much larger and now become smaller and smaller. Engines become smaller and smaller and more efficient. We need something that's small, something we can mass produce, mass assemble, at very high quality standards, and we can do it as a result more economically than what we can do by constantly prototyping large machines. And here are some of those 984 reactors. In fact, these are categories of reactors. We have the pressurized water reactor, which is basically every nuclear reactor in the world today is a pressurized water reactor, except for a few. 98% of all reactors are pressurized water reactor. It was invented in the 40s. It was commercialized in the 1950s. It was designed properly the way we use it today in the 1960s, and we're still building them. Most of the ones that operate in the world today were in fact built in the 70s. That's what we've got. That's all we've got. Then we've got high temperature gas reactors and sodium fast reactors, and we've got something called a heat pipe reactor. And each one of these sort of particular design systems we look at and say, can we get to the point where we solve these 3 issues? And we get to the molten salt reactor. It's the only one that ticks all 3 boxes here. It doesn't need refueling for the lifetime of a ship, 25 to 30 years, which means that we don't have to take any fuel out of it. We don't need to manage any spent fuels, which is a source of proliferation in any port around the world. That solves the first issue. It doesn't need any operator intervention in terms of in case of some disaster at sea. If the vessel breaks up and sinks or there is some sort of attack on the ship, it shuts itself down. And we can show you how that's done. And it's something that's quite simple. It's something that operates with a liquid fuel, so it doesn't have many moving parts. It's got no pressure in it. And as a result, we can make it quite affordable and mass produce it so that we get that constant, fast innovation cycle that allows us to make a better machine as we go along. And with this, we can solve those 2 parts. We can make zero carbon fuels with this quite easily. Here is an example of a floating production plant where you've got an electric socket in the ocean. This is just one example of how it can be done, but you have a floating power node with these reactors on board that just sit there making heat. That heat is transferred into electricity. The electricity is sent to water desalination, which then turns it into green hydrogen. We spoke a bit about that earlier on. It needs to be done efficiently and 24 hours a day. It takes nitrogen out the air. That's a very easy thing to do. Combines it with the Haber-Bosch process, which is the way you make green ammonia. And then you've got green ammonia. So we're making fuels out of seawater with a power source that doesn't emit anything. The other thing we can do is we can put them on ships and actually power ships with them. But because these are powerful machines, we don't really put them on small ships tramping around the world. We're looking at those 7,300 largest ships, container lines, that operate huge ships going from point to point on a regular service. Bulk carriers doing iron ore transportation from terminal to terminal, tankers, gas tankers, cruise ships, etc. That need awesome amounts of power and that they can rely on and that don't have that ability to pollute the environment. So here is an example. This is an actual project that's going on at the moment in Japan where we are designing a 20,000 TEU container ship. So You remember the Ever Given that was stuck in the Suez Canal a few months back? She was a 20,000 TEU container ship. This ship has enough power on board to do between 30 and 32 knots for the full lifetime of the ship. That's 30 years. Effectively, what it means is that the fuel load in the reactors on board this electrical system on board the ship enables her to do 5.2 million nautical miles on a single fuel load, emitting nothing. And she does it faster, she does it for longer, and she does more as she does this. It's actually competitive to go around the Cape from the east into Europe with the Northern Sea route. It's the same sailing distance at that speed as the Northern Sea route. It starts to compete with the trains that are moving from Asia to Europe. This is the competitive advantage that we need from new technology. If we start to use lower energy, lower energy dense materials to create an energy future for ourselves, we're just going to spin, I think, on the spot, and we end up paying more for less. Here you get more for less. Of course, a couple of other things that are important about this is that, it's not only that this vessel has the ability to travel, to sail around without emitting anything. When she arrives in a port, and this is part of the systems that we're designing around this, when she arrives in a port, she's the power station. So this is theoretical because we haven't actually designed the systems yet, but you could conceive of terminals taking power from the ship that's calling in the port. So now you're decarbonizing the port, running the gantry cranes, the pumps, the loaders and dischargers, plus of course all the port infrastructure that's there, from the electric power of the ship. And in some of these trades, like in iron ore, the iron ore transportation, nothing really happens in iron ore loading terminal, discharging terminal, unless there's a ship at berth. So you have that ability to start spreading the decarbonization further up the chain. This is really a hybrid electric drive system. So the way this functions, which is completely different to the way they use it in the Navy, which is a steam cycle. You have reactor, steam cycle, shaft line, and then propeller. Here you have a complete separation of the two. This is heat created, 650 to 700 degrees at very high megawatts, converted into electric power by a power conversion system using turbine technology. It could be steam, could be gas, could be some of the new systems that are coming. And then you have an electric drive system. Because you don't have long shaft lines from the engines, you can now move towards twin screw, triple screw, combinations of propulsion systems that give you the highest efficiency. This adds to the ability to maintain that high speed. It also changes the way that this is regulated. If you're regulating only the nuclear part rather than the entire system, it becomes rather a lot easier for regulators to deal with. The elephant in the room that questions always comes up, what happens in the case of an accident? What happens in the case of the waste at the end of this process? So I'm going to address that elephant, and I'm going to show you what really happens here. And the reason why we've chosen this particular reactor design is partly because it does so well in these cases. In a marine accident, we have to remember that, as it is today, a nuclear accident anywhere is a nuclear accident everywhere. Something happens on the other side of the world and everyone takes cover. It's this irrational fear of radiation that is part of the natural world we have to study and understand and get over. We need to relearn this stuff. But it does really well in this case, because what happens in the case of a marine accident? Let's say that there is a gas explosion on the ship, it breaks up and starts to sink. Well, you've got, first of all, the molten salt reactor, which is a non-pressurized machine. It doesn't have the ability to expel toxins into the environment. Sits inside a compartment, or first of all, inside a very powerful vessel, inside a shielded compartment deep inside the vessel. It's what we call a Coke can in a cathedral concept. There are huge crumple zones around this, and no manner of force applied to the ship will actually enable the leak of fuel from the reactor. That's a key thing, right? There's no leak that comes from it. It's an automatic shutdown, of course, and that ambient pressure, that low pressure ambient pressure environment inside this core means that it doesn't it doesn't have the ability to expel toxins into the environment like we saw at Fukushima or at Chernobyl. It's impossible to have, it's physically impossible to have that kind of accident. Because this is a liquid-fueled reactor that has salt, and that salt melts at 400 degrees centigrade. If it goes below 400 degrees centigrade, it solidifies. So what happens in the case of a catastrophic accident at sea and the ship sinking is that the fuel, the reactor stops. We won't go into exactly how that happens because there are 3 different sort of fail-safes. But the salt starts to cool, and it cools rather quickly. And below 400 degrees, it goes solid. So eventually what happens after a day or 2 is that you've got the fuel entombed like a rock inside this very powerful machine, which sits inside this very powerful shielding environment, which sits inside this very powerful construction area around it, and it goes down, and it cannot pollute the environment. So, nuclear accident, no pollution. That's a good outcome. In terms of an accident regarding the reactor, say we have a reactor accident, we have passive fail-safes that kick in, that no operator can override on this. And the first thing that happens is that the control system in the reactor, which is held in place by springs, if that spring system fails or if anything fails around it, they automatically close. That stops the criticality of the machine, and it stops generating power. Then the fuel is drained into a separate set of cavities where, again, it cannot have any power effect. And eventually, if the ship is going to go down at, say, 8,000 meters and we can never ever see her again, we'll poison that fuel, it'll be killed, it can never ever be used for anything ever again. Piracy. Well, we have some really great advantage. Remember, this is a fully electric ship. A fully electric ship means we have things we can do against piracy. We have a very high speed, we have superior speed, and it's completely isolated from access. No one has access to the particular reactors on this. Additionally, by flagging these in the correct administration, UK, US initially, that's the flags for this, we're also under the protection of those navies. Remote control, we have electric ships, our electronic ships, we can start to form the platform for this, for new generations of autonomous vessel systems for this. Lastly, I'm just going to talk very, very quickly, 30 seconds left, waste management. People say, but what about the waste? Yes, what about the waste? But actually, the waste part of this is the selling point. It doesn't add to the problem. We heard earlier on about the waste of batteries. Remember, we've got an industry here that releases 1 billion tons of CO2 per year into the atmosphere. Don't forget, 10% of that billion tons of CO2 in the atmosphere is still going to be with us in 120,000 years. It doesn't disappear quickly. No matter what we do today, it's still going to be with us in 120,000 years. The nice thing about these molten salt reactors is that the fuel efficiency is so superior that we're actually generating very little waste. And what we haven't used in 30 years, we recycle and reuse in the next generation of reactors. So sustainability starts to kick in where we're not mining for new material each time. We simply top up that 4% that we've used, and it goes on. Next generation. Remember, the salt is impervious to damage from radiation. It continues to work from generation to generation. So we're recycling that final waste, and we can actually take certain things out of that as well. Let me give you an example, just as a final, leave you with this thought, okay? A Cape-sized bulk carrier doing iron ore transportation for 25 years. She sails from Tubarão in Brazil to Qingdao in China, or even in Japan, and she does this at her absolute maximum design service speed. And let's say that with a little bit extra, she can do 16 knots rather than 14 knots. She will use 170 kilos of fuel in 25 years. That is also the total amount of waste after 25 years. Now, 170 kilos of the kind of fuel I'm talking about, it's about half the size of this monitor that's sitting on the stage in front of me, put into a dry cask box that's stored away. After 20 years, it's background radiation, and it's stored for about 300 years. You can take it out and put it out into the ground. This is a sustainable way forward. That big mega box ship, that 20,000 TEU ships, in the same way, 30 knots for 30 years, is 1,300 kilos of fuel. that is about 6 of these studio monitors that you see in front of you. That's the total waste after 30 years. I think this is something that you should, hopefully after today, you will go back and you think, actually, this is worth thinking about. Try to unlearn what you think you know about nuclear. Look into it and see what the potential is here. The dangers are perceived, but the reality is actually one that we can move forward with. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mikkel. It was very, very difficult to stop you there because it's fascinating and you describe it so incredibly well. We do also have some questions for you, and so we're not going to let you escape that quickly.
Okay.
Why don't we go at the top? And you should have them in the screen in front of you as well. So if you look forward, you have the screen as well. More than 50 small modular reactors projects with only a couple in operation. How are you going to change this paradigm for maritime market?
Well, the answer to that is actually quite simple. There are 50 small modular reactor projects being planned. Very few of them are funded, and very few of them are much more than just a small version of what we have today. Small modular reactors being spoken about in the UK and around the world tends to be just exactly the same reactors that we have in nuclear power stations today, just smaller. So you have pressurized environments, you have this sort of constant refueling, et cetera, et cetera. Funding is the big thing. The reactor that I've just described to you here is funded by 3 companies, which is a company called TerraPower in the United States, owned and funded by Bill Gates, Southern Company, big utility in the United States, and ourselves, Core Power in London, and the US government. 80% of the funding for the initial reactor here comes from the US Department of Energy, which is a contract that we signed earlier this year, and the first proof of concept will be with us at the end of 2024. Then we're building that into a marine demonstrator, if you like, towards the end of this decade. So that's how we're going to change it.
Excellent. We're going to go straight on to the second question. How do you modulate the power of the reactor when full capacity isn't needed?
So with a molten salt reactor, you can load follow. This is a reactor that has 720 megawatt potential. We run it at 180 megawatt max with about between 1 and 30 megawatt electric. So it's idling most of its life, but you can load follow between the smallest amount of power and the max amount of power you can, or the max durable amount of power you can pull out of this. So we load follow very efficiently. That's the beauty of molten salt reactors. You have that instant reactivity and negative coefficient, that volume coefficient inside the core that allows us to do that. It's a technical question. I'd love to answer it more, but it's going to take a long time.
Whoever did ask that question, please feel free to track Mikkel down later and ask him.
Environmental NGOs, my new best friends. Environmental NGOs are like shipping in the sense that there isn't one particular type of them. They're all a little bit different. The real ones, the pragmatic ones that are actually looking for a solution rather than an ideology to hang their hat on, are very pragmatic about this. Xeon Light, who was the founder of Extinction Rebellion, don't know if you've heard of them, but they're one of these extremely activist environmental areas, is one of the biggest supporters of this technology that we have. And she's advocating for this publicly. Look her up on Twitter, Xeon Light, her name is. And you see this spreading. We see Greenpeace, we see World Wildlife Fund, Friends of the Earth, etc., looking at this more and more pragmatically. We're not quite there yet, but I think we'll get there.
Excellent. And just very, very, very quickly on the economics of the powered ship in terms of cost.
So the economics of this is completely different from the way that it functions at the moment. If you buy a diesel engine and you buy a ship with a diesel engine on board, you've got a low capex and you've got an enormous volatile OPEX tail throughout the life of that vessel. Here you get the energy up front. So initially, if it was going to be the case that a ship owner would be the owner and operator of this system, he would have to pay all of the capex up front, and that would be a lot of money. That's basically 30 years worth of operation. For a big container ship like what we talked about, you're talking about $1.2, $1.3 billion. That's too much. So what we're looking at is not converting every ship-owning company into a licensed nuclear operator, but rather than have these particular ships on lease from an organization set up in joint ventures with these owners, with the duty holder, the company responsible for the licensing and the operation under license, like Southern Company is, our big partner on this, would then provide, like the airline industry does, provide through-life maintenance and the whole system on lease, if you like. And that flattens it out. The residual value of that energy in this reactor that we recycle at the end of 30 years is extremely high. So the depreciation down to the residual value of this is actually much less than you think. So if you spread that out over a nice lease scheme with a decent IRR for the financiers, you end up with something which is akin to bunker fuel at about $340, $350 a ton.
Excellent. Well, unfortunately, on that note, we're going to have to bring it to a close. I'm sure there are a number of other things we'd like to look into. Please join me in saying an enormous thank you to Mikkel. Thank you. It's very interesting.
Thank you.
So I'm sure that's given you some food for thought. It's interesting because it's often a question of reality versus perception. And so I'll let you consider that. Now we have a presentation from Dale Morris, who is going to be talking to us about advanced aerohydrocoupling and VP analysis for design engineering of wind-driven ships. We are a little bit pushed back because of that time, but Dale is going to be presenting for about 20 minutes now, so we're not going to cut you short. Please.
Thank you very much. Quite a tough act to follow, but thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you today. I mean, hearing today about all the fascinating possibilities that are out there and all the work that's going towards creating a greener future is great. I mean, as a company, this collection over here, we are super passionate about the health of our oceans and the planet, and we just want to find a way that we can help. I mean, sailing obviously has a really long and storied history in the commercial shipping industry, and it was very quick to obviously move on from that due to all the weather dependencies and uncertainties. And of course, we'd be very reluctant then to move back into that. But listening to what everyone was talking about today, I mean, it's very hard to deny the energy efficiency. There's very little supply chain logistics to work out. The wind is delivered at the ship. With the fuels that have been talked about, the cost staying high, I mean, any saving will be attractive that we could achieve. We know that the industry is looking for complete solutions that are easy to install, have little input from the crew, and of course, quick to pay off. There's plenty of concepts out there already. Some are already sailing. My colleague Damon Roberts is going to be talking about one such concept, the Dyna Rig, tomorrow. Very much looking forward to that. But what I'll talk about today is more about the process behind how we assess the performance of the systems and the impact on the ship's ultimate performance. Developing a very full picture of what the ship is going to do with these systems in place, and how the aero forces are then coupled with the hydrodynamics. I mean, the main question that anyone should be asking is, will the system deliver on the promises that are made? And that answer is going to be quite different for each ship. We talked at lunch about horses for courses, and we need to have a very full view of each ship individually. I'd like to start with presenting the group of companies under North Technology Group. Each one is a market leader in what they do, all collectively owned by Oakley Capital, investments in the UK. They each have their own speciality, but the power in our group is the cross-collaborations in developing what we like to call the engine above deck. That's the sails, the rig, the rigging, the whole lot. It's the powerhouse of any wind-driven vessel. The sails create the power, and the rig controls that and then transfers that efficiently into the platform. So of course we have North Sails, the aero specialists. Southern Spars and Hall Spars are the mast manufacturers, structural experts in their field. Future Fibers, they're doing a lot of innovative cabling solutions, not only in the marine sector, but also in industrial and aerospace. We have RigPro, this is our service arm, and they're located worldwide for fast, effective response, keeping downtime to an absolute minimum. And then worth mentioning here, North Kiteboarding and Mystic, obviously doing kites and action sports, talking about the kite surfing as or kites as a viable solution for certain types of vessels, not all. We all work together, as I said, to create the best sailing experience we can for our customers. Our customers are varied and they all have different requirements, but a lot of those requirements have parallels to the commercial sector. I mean, we have, for example, the America's Cup, always looking for optimal performance. We have the Volvo Ocean Race, where reliability is key. You know, we have a saying there, to finish first you need to finish. And then, of course, the super yachts, where we've powered the biggest sailing yachts in the world. And their safety and ease of use is critical. So we have, for those who are not familiar with any of those, we'll have a little video to introduce ourselves. I hope that got your attention. Second to last presentation of the day. So yeah, moving on. So how do we, what is our approach to satisfying those requirements? So I'm here to talk about. So our process is always evolving and improving. You know, we've been looking at sailing yachts long since you guys typically gave up on it. But not so long ago, we were still using a relatively simplified approach, where each element of the whole boat was designed in isolation somewhat. You know, what I'm illustrating over here is the boat designer would typically provide us or specify to us what the righting moment is of the vessel, and then we would design the rig and sails to just handle those forces. Alternatively, another simple approach, which I've seen, again, I mean, I'm seeing this now talking to people in the commercial industry. We're seeing someone specifying the max wind speed that they want to operate in, and then we would then use the same approach, you know, see the forces that are generated and make sure that the rig is going to handle that. It's fine, you know, you get a pretty good idea of what the peak loads that the whole vessel will see. But it doesn't give you the whole story. It doesn't show you how often you're seeing the loads, what conditions you're going to be seeing them in, how the sails are trimmed at that point, and particularly how all the forces are balanced together. You know, often there's a disconnect. I mean, even if there's a max wind speed specified, are you going to exceed other operational limits, like, for example, the heel? So that's where we look to balance the forces. I mean, this is nothing new to anyone in shipping or in ship design. It's no light bulb moment here. But what has often not needed to be dealt with in so much detail is these large lateral forces. With a simple screw propulsion system, you know, it's quite easy to keep the boat going in a straight line. Whereas with a significant wind propulsion unit, you could end up with the incorrect positioning of that on deck. You might end up with a relatively large yaw moment, creating leeway angle, or extreme rudder angles just to keep it going in a straight line, which we know is creating significant, dramatic increases in hull resistance. So you do need to get it right. Of course, more work is needed, I think, on the hydro side to understand exactly where the limits are and where you're going to kind of break even. That's not really what we're looking at today. Obviously, once we have the aerodynamics and the hydrodynamics, this can then be inputted into velocity performance prediction package. Again, I'm sure all the yacht ship designers have their own packages. Our one, developed in-house through years of competitive competition, is highly effective at looking at the aero package and finding the optimum sail trims. I mean, what we're looking at here is a simulation we had run on the Black Pearl, one of the dyno-rigged super yachts out there. You have the wind conditions in the bottom, true wind speed, apparent wind speed, and angles, the rotation of each of the sails to get the optimal performance, and the resulting rudder angles, heel angle, leeway, and of course the speed. This thing gives you tangible results that you can put your hands on, time from port to port, liters of fuel saved. This is then obviously the best way to, assess any changes to the platform to be able to get the most out of it and get the right decisions. As the aero package becomes more significant and you're looking for more liters of fuel saved, the more reason it is to look at project-specific aero analysis. You can't, at that point, be relying on generic databases to look at that. And that's where I think we have probably the most value to add into this design loop. North Sails, the experts in aerodynamics, we've developed over, again, many years what we like to call our virtual wind tunnel. And so that's not just complex codes like what we're showing here. This is a snip from a RANS simulation. If that name's not familiar to everyone, basically it means a complex simulation that's going to take a long time to run and it's going to cost a lot of money. But we also have an array of other code solutions that are a lot simpler and more efficient, and when used in the right application can give you just as good of an answer. The key is knowing when and where you can make that differentiation. As I said, we don't claim to be hull designers, and there's definitely a lot of, as I said, work to be done to how to integrate an aero package like this into a hull shape. But just as much, the aero side of this analysis is quite complex. Boundary layer onset flow resulting in twisted apparent wind angles onto the sail plan, the myriad of trim options on how we're going to get the best out of the platform, and of course the interaction that one mast will have onto the other. As I say, this is where our experience is strong. Then, having done that full performance prediction, having run the aero analysis in full detail, we then have this very clear picture of what's going on in the sail plan. To get even better again, you would look at the fluid structure interaction, looking at the deflections that the forces from the sails creating onto the structure, and then how that loops back into how it affects the performance. The angle of attack of the sail plan might change in that instance. So we go through that design loop within our design process. That's a very efficient and well thought through action to get the answers that we are looking for, to get the peak performance. As I said, coupling that with the hydro, you then have the full picture. You can really hone in exactly on what the critical load cases are for the structure, and not looking at necessarily ones that are physically improbable. I mean, we know for a conservative industry like commercial shipping, they expect the answers to be right first time, and doing this in-depth analysis is the best chance we have to get there. we of course still need to differentiate between normal versus extreme conditions. I mean, normal sailing may, for some vessels, need to be done in extreme conditions or what we would consider extreme weather conditions. But what I'm talking about here is the difference between operational conditions where the sails are going to need to be adjusted in and out continually to get the most out of the platform versus kind of a survival condition and where you just expect the sail plan to be easing or depowering. And that differentiation can be very significant on the specification of the componentry that would go into this type of a setup, where it just needs to be strong enough but doesn't need to be able to pull that load on. That can have a massive impact on the cost of that componentry. Again, having the clear picture we're able to then make that differentiation. And finally, being able to make the link between the conditions that the vessel is in to the optimal performance that we'll need to deliver on the promises made by the supplier, as well as then the structural loads that rig will be seeing. Here we have an example from the Maltese Falcon dashboard. This was commissioned in 2006, so 15-year-old technology, where the masts had fiber optics running up the length, being able to assess exactly what the strains were and have clear communication back to the crew when you were at a level that was getting a little bit on the upper end of the operational envelope. We think this is, again, as I said in the beginning, we know that the industry is looking for simple solutions that will have little to no input from the crew, and having that clear picture, again, is the best way that we know to satisfy that requirement. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Dale. Very, very interesting. It's really interesting because I spent my whole professional career working with cargo ships and seeing these ships in port and just these big, big, blocky things. And then seeing some of the images you have there, certainly the video, it's quite inspiring. Do we have any questions from the audience after that presentation? Do we have anything they're curious about at all? I think you did an excellent job of explaining it. And so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please. I'll call you up. I'll wait for him to get the just wait 2 seconds. So now we're getting on to the end of the day, and we just have one final panel discussion or fireside chat as it's been described. This is quite an interesting discussion because it's talking with two giants of the industry. And so we will be talking with MSC and also with Shell and talking about their views on decarbonisation and also where they see that we're going and what they're doing together in partnership. And so if you could please join me in a very, very warm welcome to the stage for Bud and Melissa from MSC and Shell, please.
Thank you.
So welcome again. Pleasure to see you. In fact, we had the chance to speak last week on a video call, but it was very brief, and so it's a pleasure to actually be here in person with you. We had a number of things we want to discuss today. I think there's a lot has been said during the conference today, a lot of very interesting presentations. And so we'd like to start off just talking about decarbonisation in general, talk about your views, talking about how this is impacting shipping, and then move our way towards the collaboration that you have at the moment between your two companies. What I would like to do, and also if there are questions from the audience, please don't hesitate, put them on Slido or put your hand up if you have questions. The idea is to also have your views and cover what you're looking for. Before we do get started, I would like to just take a second for you each to introduce yourselves, because you will do a lot better job of introducing yourselves than I would. So if you could just tell me about yourself, what you've been doing in the past, and what you're doing now within your company.
Okay. Do you want me to get started, Bud?
I think you should.
Okay, thank you. You can tell we know each other. So my name is Melissa Williams. I work with Shell Oil Company. I've been there about 24 years. I'm a mechanical engineer by background. I worked for NASA as a flight controller for the International Space Station and Johnson & Johnson before that. So I guess you're wondering, why am I sitting here? Well, I have a lot of background in the fuel side. I started in manufacturing. So most of my career was hard hat, FRCs in the field. Then I moved on to optimization of the refinery, optimization of the supply chain. And recently my role was IMO 2020. I was the lead person for rolling that out for Shell as well. So a little bit about me. My new job is VP of Sectors and Decarbonization. So many of you are probably saying, what is that? I'm glad you asked. So what it is Shell has reshaped our organization in terms of decarbonizing. So as of January of this year, our strategy includes helping our customers decarbonize, which is considered scope 3. And so with that, we also reshaped our organization to match that strategy. And so we believe that decarbonization will happen by sector. So my role is to focus on the marine sector.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, and I'm very much looking forward to digging into that. It's a fascinating discussion because a company such as Shell, it's difficult to put the term decarbonisation with Shell, and so I'm very interested to hear you describe how that's working and how you're putting it into practice.
Okay.
In the meantime, Bud, if you could please introduce yourself as well.
Sure. I'm Bud Dard, the Executive Vice President for Maritime Policy and Government Affairs at the MSC Group here in Geneva. Last year, I sat on a panel after I gave a keynote, and you put me with one of my classmates from college, in a college where there's only like 200 graduates per year. So you had to top that this year. She didn't go back far enough on her CV, but Melissa and I actually went to the same high school in New Orleans, if you could believe that.
Yes, we did.
But contrary to her, it was such a great path she took. I ran away and joined the Navy at the age of 17, and I was in nuclear engineering in submarines for a few years, 6 years, before I went to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy and became a deck officer there. When I graduated, there actually were no jobs going to sea in the U.S. Merchant Marine, and I went in the Coast Guard instead as a ship inspector and casualty investigator, which had some great opportunities to see all sorts of different ships every single day, and I really loved the work. Then they sent me to law school. I became a lawyer in the Coast Guard, and when I retired in 2010 to take a job at the Cruise Lines International Association, it was a nice stepping off point for me into the private sector. Or so I thought. Had two kind of fairly easy years until Costa Concordia happened, and then it was a little challenging to be in that role. But what doesn't kill us makes us stronger, and I feel like it made me stronger. And after 7 years there, MSC was kind enough to invite me to join them. So what do? I manage all of our government affairs work in the 155 countries that we work in, including multinational work such as at the IMO or the ILO or other UN agencies such as UNCTAD as appropriate or WHO. I also manage our relationships with trade associations of the maritime sense. And as you saw from my presentation earlier, you can imagine pretty much all of them that you've heard of, we're involved with one way or the other. And internally, I'm leading our work on alternative fuels work. And also, I'm the lead for our strategic partnership with Shell.
Yes.
So that's how Melissa and I work together daily. But we also had an existing relationship because we were a significant customer of Shell's, and they were a significant provider for us.
Yes.
So here we are.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And very interested to dig into a lot of those things a little bit more in detail.
Not the high school thing, though, right?
Yeah. Stay away from that one.
We'll keep that towards the end. But no, so I guess that a lot of what Mika was saying earlier about atomic power is something that you have experience of back from your Navy days. But we're not going to go into that in detail either. We're going to start off just talking about decarbonisation in general. And really, it's a bit of a broad question, but in terms of decarbonisation for the shipping industry, it is quite difficult. And the real question is, why is it so difficult? And do you have high hopes for the future? Why don't I start off with you, Melissa, and give me your thoughts.
So thoughts of decarbonization and shipping from an oil major is directly related to the fuel. What makes it difficult is there is no regulation. Shipping is not part of the Paris Agreement. IMO has not provided any clarity. We have discussions about it, but it doesn't exist today. When you talk about the fuel of a zero carbon emission fuel, they're not readily available. And the technologies I learned a lot today. I understand a lot is being done, but it's not available today. It's not available in scale. My background is optimization and realization. So until it's available, tested, I don't have anything to sell to our customers. But that doesn't mean we're holding back. We are doing stuff. We're doing things like looking at existing strategies for existing vessels. It differs than new build vessels. New build vessels, we've talked about LNG. It is not the end all, but it's better than the alternative today. And so one of the things about decarbonization is the market tends to think that Shell is an expert and everything comes fuel. But this, I'm here to tell you, we're not. This is a new journey. We're going to need help on this journey, and we need partners such as ship owners such as MSC and other partners so we can collaborate and share our technical expertise, what we do know, and then we can come together and come up with a solution together. So decarbonization is a new space. I feel like it's industrialization in the 2000s.
I think you're entirely right then. I think it's a good comparison, the Industrial Revolution, essentially, Mark II. Just moving over to you, Bud. I mean, very much same question. I mean, it is a very, very broad question, but I think it's important for the audience really to know how you come about this subject.
Yeah, so if I could maybe take a moment to comment on today, too. I also found the presentations interesting, and I especially found it interesting that we had kind of a blend of vendors and more policy-focused people. I thought that was great, and for those of you who gave presentations, thank you. I thought you really kept our attention really well and added a lot to the dialogue. So from our perspective, I am optimistic. I kind of have to be honest with you, but I am optimistic. And I don't know how we're going to get there. I don't. Not because there's not a way, but because I don't know what the best way is going to be yet, and I think we have to explore a range of them, and that's why this relationship is particularly good for us. I mean, we work with other vendors and suppliers as well in a variety of places, but this one has a really broad scope to it because that wide range of options we're looking at, Shell is also looking at, and in the end, they can provide better insight, I think, into what's available in the way of fuels in particular, but then also how we can apply them that we could ever come to on our own without the help of a partner working side by side. And as I mentioned earlier, I really think that the long pole in the tent here, if you will, is going to be the fuel. I believe that for the most part, the shipboard technology will be there. It's coming along pretty rapidly. I think there are questions about scale of fuel cells, as I mentioned earlier. There's question about scale of batteries and what role they'll be able to play as far as how big they are. But I really think the controlling path for us to truly decarbonize is going to be, can we get the fuels and can we afford to operate ships with it? And that second question honestly will be a bigger question about how essential is the service that we provide. I mean, we think it's very essential. I mean, we connect the world. We are what makes global trade function. If the world decides it doesn't want that anymore, well, maybe we look for a different line of work. But as long as it has the kind of importance that I think it will, I think it'll just have to be priced into the value of goods at the retail and wholesale level as appropriate, and we'll ultimately be able to pay for it. But it will be a factor, cost will, in which solutions look better at which time. And it won't be a fixed value, right? I mean, if you look at LNG, and you were focused just on cost 5 years ago,
you wouldn't have it today.
Yeah, you'd bet the farm that it was always going to track below liquid fuels. But you would have bet the farm in the wrong direction.
Exactly.
As we sit here today when it comes to pure cost.
And that's why we have to be flexible, right? Because each day we learn more than the day before. And the more we collaborate, we're discovering new things. And so exactly like you said, the fuel, you want a lot of biofuel. I want to give you a lot of biofuel. But Melissa doesn't have enough cooking oil in her backyard to give him the biofuel that he wants. And that's where the supply comes in. So globally, it's a process. We know that biogas is a great solution, but we have to collect it. We have to get it to the ports. They're not at the ports, and that cost. So that's what makes this decarbonization journey interesting, because the solutions are there, but they may not be there at scale, or the technology may still be being discovered. And that's where this partnership is so good, because we both are learning together, and we have these dialogues in the moment instead of Shell presenting a solution and MSC, that's not going to work for me. Or vice versa, you are asking me for a product, I want to give you the product, but let me tell you why I cannot and some of the challenges we have, but this is what we're doing. And so as Bud said, we will get there. And we will get there soon, because that's the way of the future, and we're in it, and we're committed.
I certainly am very, very happy to hear this. I mean, I think it's a very, very positive outlook on the future. But just going into a couple of things you were saying there, in terms of the types of fuel, I mean, MSC, I mean, I've known MSC since I started my professional career. I mean, we've been moving things around by containers. Admittedly, it used to be for manufactured goods. Now it's a lot of bulk goods. A lot of raw commodities are moved around by containers as well. I always looked MSC potentially naively as they move containers around, but without really realizing how many ships you own. And you showed some figures earlier in your presentation. In terms of the fuels that you use, can you just give us a bit of an idea of the different fuels that you use in these ships?
Are you looking for a volume, or you want me to describe the
different types?
Yeah. So if you think about 2020, I think is a good example. We had to look at a variety of fuel solutions to make the 2020 regulations work. And by the way, what we thought was just an enormous pile of bricks coming down on us, and what was, I don't think it's any exaggeration, the single most impactful piece of maritime legislation in the history of maritime legislation, all to take effect theoretically on one day. It is a tiny footnote compared to what we're facing right now.
Yes.
But if you look at our fleet as to how we had to deal with that, we had a variety of solutions. We went with exhaust gas cleaning systems on a lot of our cruise ships, and subsequently a fairly large number of our cargo ships as well. So for those ships, we really are trying to source residual, which in some places is becoming a little bit of a rare animal and a boutique fuel, because we thought back in 2008, back when I was on the government benches and we were making these regulations, that the compliant fuel was going to be almost like 95% distillate and maybe 5% blends. It turned out to pretty much turn on its head when we got close to the time for the suppliers to give it to us. So we needed very low sulfur fuel oil for the blends at 0.5% for the ships that were not going to use exhaust gas cleaning systems, and we needed distillate fuel for those ships at the 0.1 if they were going to operate anywhere in North America or in the North Sea or Baltic region as well. And then we started progressing our thinking further beyond those fuels, and putting aside, we also had a little bit of 1.5% we needed in there too for Mediterranean operations for cruise for a while, thanks to the EU sulfur directive. We then started thinking, what's next? And the logical what's next was what could be available soon, and that was fossil-based LNG. We made some orders for cruise ships. We followed up with a very substantial order that we've talked about in public for cargo ships as well, that will be capable and intend to run on LNG as a fuel. But I want to be really clear, and this is why it's a never-ending process for us, is that we need to get off of fossil-based LNG. It's not our future. It is a short-term win, and we want to take those gains when it comes to decarbonization and other benefits that come with that fuel. But we need to migrate quickly into bio and synthetic LNG, and to get that scaled up takes a strong demand signal from a large customer like us. So I think that pathway for LNG, you probably will also see emulated for other ships within our fleet as we start looking forward, including the retrofits. Will it be methanol as the best solution? Will it be biofuel in the short term as the best solution? Where's it going to come from? How much of it? Can we afford to actually pay for it? And very importantly, do the customers realize that at the end of the day, they have to pay the cost for this? And that's a hard conversation to have. But we all want to decarbonize, but it's not going to happen because we're not going to have a business if ultimately the end user of those services doesn't pay the price.
Exactly. Exactly.
I think it makes an awful lot of sense what you're saying, and certainly, I mean, IMO 2020 did seem like the biggest thing in the world at the time. I remember it being described as the biggest change in shipping since moving from sail to coal, and now looking back at that, it's kind of, yeah, it was interesting at the time. It kept us busy, but it's nothing compared to what we're facing at the moment. Just moving back to what you were saying earlier regarding Shell itself. I mean, is the idea of a company like Shell decarbonizing seen as almost an existential crisis or as a massive opportunity?
I would say it's an opportunity basis, the climate, our customers. So our strategy, the core to the strategy is the customer back. And whether the regulation is there or not, what we're noticing is that if you look at the top companies, just stock exchange, they all have a decarbonization strategy. Looking customer back, if you're supplying a company that has a decarbonization strategy, a sustainability strategy, and they now have competitors who will provide that opportunity, one should think about how can I meet that demand? So part of this strategy, we have talked about it today. Our CEO and our leaders, their children are not, the next generation, they're not going to accept it. Climate change is real, and we're accountable for our part in that climate change. And so our leaders decided to look at the signs, take the science that's out there. If you don't start today, we already know what our future is going to be like tomorrow. So if we don't do something today, then we know what gift we're giving our kids. It may not be perfect, but it's better than the alternative. And so we as an organization decided to take that first step, which is a risk. But our customers, such as MSC, believe in the same path, and there's others as well, believe that this is the right direction to go, and the regulations are going to follow. But we have, I think, a role to play with providing the clarity that we know. We don't know everything, but I can tell you what we've done, what we've been studying over the years. I've talked to some of the participants here. We've been looking at hydrogen for years. So this isn't something new. And so one thing that we know as a fuel supplier, if you want an answer 10 years from now, you need to start working today.
I mean, it's interesting everything you're saying, and it's food for an awful lot of thought. And I like the way you say this is not something necessarily we're doing out of choice. It's something that has to happen. Mm-hmm. And so the question is how to make it happen well.
Exactly.
It's not yes or no. It's let's actually get it done.
Yes.
It's also interesting because we were talking earlier about the impact of this on ship owners. And also there's been a lot of discussion on the impact on commodity trading companies as well, large users of these ships. A lot of those companies are not necessarily exposed to the final consumer. And it's interesting because both Shell and MSC are both household names. Do you think that this has an impact on the direction that the companies are going, or do you think it's more a question of where your clients, where your customers are pushing you as well? Just a couple of thoughts on that.
I'll let you go first.
Well, I will say I think Shell is probably much more consumer facing, on a retail level than we are as a company. We have very different conversations with the general public about decarbonization and the costs involved in a per consumer unit of something that we ship than we do with our actual customers, the beneficial cargo owners or the non-vessel operators that are our large customers because, well, they need to do their job and get the most value they can for the least amount of money out of us. Where the consumer's like, what? So my T-shirt's going to cost an extra 45 cents? I don't care. Okay. That's a very different conversation to have. Those that are consumer facing, I think, get more pressure faster. And I think you've seen some more rapid transformation in the cruise sector as a natural step with that. In the container sector, we had to be more thoughtful about it But the reality is our customers still, because their customers are in a lot of time retail and demanding this,
Exactly.
and they've announced public goals. A lot of them are publicly traded companies. They're demanding more and more out of us all the time, in which, you know, we're ready to deliver. We will be, but they have to be pragmatic about it. And again, they have to be part of the journey. And I do want to make one comment about regulation, because I agree absolutely with what Melissa said, that we must do this. We know we've got to do it. And if we're ahead of the regulations for now, fine. Regulations, they will catch up. But I don't think IMO gets enough credit for what they have done. Because keep in mind, IMO is a group of governments. It's not us. It's not really, I don't know if we have anybody from the Swiss government here in the room, but I don't know if we have anybody that sits on a government delegation there. They're the ones who make the decision. And when we started having these discussions at IMO, back when I was on the government benches, you know, the huge political dynamic of the UNFCCC negotiations of what was going to replace Kyoto, which pretty much gave a free pass to developing countries. I mean, they applied a particular legal principle to mean if you're a developing country, you don't have to do anything at all. And they weren't going to compromise at IMO on that. But despite that, in 2013, regulations came into effect that were mandatory worldwide that began to govern emissions reductions of CO2 and greenhouse gases from ships in 2013. What other sectors globally, you know, have really done that? If you look at the scheme for aviation in Corsia, honestly, there's some work to be done there to actually sell that in the long term regarding policy. And since 2013, it's been one enhancement after another, after another, after another, and after another. Each one of those enhancements comes with a substantial amount of geopolitical capital between developing countries and developed countries to get there. So while they're arguing about that, companies like Melissa's and mine, we're solving the problem.
Correct.
Because we're committed to getting to net zero for 2050. We're going to get there. Regulators will come along eventually, and we'll be happy to have that conversation with them.
And we'll have the data to prove we're ready.
I suppose as long as the regulators, the regulations are actually in line with what made sense to you along the way, and that's something for an open dialogue, an open discussion back and forth. We're going to move on to some other topics. Before we do, we've had a couple of questions came up on the screen here. The first question actually, I mean, they're for Bud and Melissa. I'm assuming the questions are not for me anyway, so that went without saying. The first question that came up is, do you think nuclear is part of the solution? Did Mikhail change your mind at least a little bit?
Well, part of the collaboration is to look at everything. At this point, there is not enough of finite information to make a call this early. However, so all things are on the table of what we're looking at. It's not a primary solution today. That's why I say I learned a lot. I'm here with a learner mindset to try to understand what is out there in the market. But whatever the solution is, I can tell you Melissa's belief, not Shell, the future will be, Shell believes a polyfuel solution, meaning different segments in marine may have a different solution. So nuclear may have a place for a segment in the marine industry, and we understand that. So from where I stand, all options are open. We're open to look at different solutions. We have a view based on data that we have today. However, as we understand, we're on a journey, right? And so I do believe there may be a place for it in a segment. I am not aware of any today, but as the information comes along and information like today that we've learned, you take that information, you go test it. We have an R&D department. We have experience with shipping with different customers. And so that may be a potential project in the future. Who knows? I don't know.
So I maybe approach that question a little differently. And, you know, I have my own experience and bias when it comes to naval and nuclear engineering. And I never really saw pressurized water reactors as being viable for commercial shipping. I have a long list of reasons why. We could have a whole segment on that if it wouldn't bore you all to tears. But what is being described here as a molten salt reactor or other technologies such as the fusion technology, which has really made a lot of progress, at least theoretically, it's a different kettle of fish. And I think it deserves a look. It's certainly something that for the longer term, you know, we're willing to consider and are looking at for MSC because we haven't ruled anything out yet. Which of our ships it would be the best suited for, I don't know, but I can tell you that there's a premium for speed in the container services. So what was being described is certainly something that is a consideration for us. It's not the first time that I've heard some variation of that presentation, and it certainly has some merit, deserves a real look, and he didn't need to change my mind today, the other part of that question, because I already have very much an open mind on it as we explore these options.
But I do want to be clear, Shell is not in the nuclear business. So there's, someone hopefully in the nuclear business can provide that expertise, but it is something that I believe that we should be open to the different solutions that may be available in the market.
Ironically, we have the same problem. We are also not in the nuclear.
Probably the vast majority of us are in the same situation.
Exactly.
The day NSC wants to get in that business, I'm ready.
You're their van. Otherwise, we have another question here. Before we do go on to the next question, because we've had a lot of questions on Slido, it's also nice to have questions from the audience, people actually asking the questions instead of us relying on apps. Are there any questions anyone would like to ask on this subject, or should I go to the next? Let's have a look at this next question quickly. A very similar question, but regarding hydrogen. So why don't you just start off?
So hydrogen is something that Shell has been studying, I said earlier, for years now, and longer-term solution. I see it as a viable option, but again, longer-term solution. Hydrogen is being looked at in the on-road, aviation, is shipping. So the question again goes to the amount of global supply and the cost per segment. So just like biofuels, we've seen every segment, now that we're broken up into sectors, what we're learning is a lot by looking at the market into sectors. What you find out is everyone's trying to use the same thing, and you have to make sure you have enough of that thing, because otherwise it's price. That's going. The second thing we're learning is, although the numbers we saw today for shipping were fairly low for the contribution towards carbon emission, other sectors, now that we're divided into sectors, and so our customers like Walmart are just name customers, IKEA we talked about, different segments are saying that shipping is their biggest piece of their exposure. So we're trying to look down into that. So if you look at shipping alone, that may not necessarily tell you the big picture, because in COVID, we know, I don't know about you guys, but Amazon, there was a box at my house every day, right? So it didn't stop the shopping in the Williams household. So the products are moving. And so then the question, goes into understanding. So for hydrogen, it does play a significant role, but not in the next 5 years. But it does play a significant role.
It's interesting some of the things you're saying there, because, slightly off topic, but I find part of the problem we have at the moment is, as a final consumer, we don't actually have enough information, enough knowledge to make informed decisions. And I was at a conference recently, in fact, organized by the same conference organizers, but on supply chain, and somebody asked a very, very reasonable question: between having something delivered to your door and going to the shop to pick it up, which is worse? And nobody's able to answer it. And another question came up: which is better, a plastic bottle or a glass bottle? You'd say, well, the glass bottle, because the plastic bottle is made of plastic. But what about the weight of transporting the glass bottle? And these are things that they're all very, very complicated. And my issue is that we actually don't have the information to hand to make these decisions. But we're not going to get sidetracked by this question. Very quickly, before we do move on, hydrogen.
Hydrogen plays a role, no doubt. I am not as bullish as Melissa on maybe what its scope is in maritime, but its scope in society and value it's going to add in decarbonization is going to be huge.
Yes.
It's just a question on
what
is the best usage of that resource, because as we produce hydrogen today, it's of very little value for decarbonization. You probably emit more greenhouse gases than you would save by burning it. So we've got to, go through this progression that I described earlier to get it scaled up and in use. I'm for deep sea ocean shipping of long duration and levels of autonomy, I'm doubtful the H2 molecule itself is going to be our hydrogen carrier for that purpose. But I could be wrong, and if fuel cells get a big breakthrough, I'd be thrilled to be wrong. But it is a gateway to get into some of these other advanced fuels that we need.
It's a derivative.
Yeah. So the derivatives of e-methanol, synthetic LNG, green ammonia, which all have a lot of promise as well, and overcome some of the obstacles. They've all got challenges, but overcome some of the obstacles of H2. I think you got to pass through hydrogen. So why aren't we all promoting that right now? Because that's a good step.
Yes.
It's not going to go to waste.
Thank you very much. We've got another question there, but I'm actually going to hold that question because I think it's relevant for our discussion later when we're talking about your collaboration. And I'd like to get into that question there. Before we do go on to this, I was going to ask you about your views on the fuel landscape between now and 2050. Again, please get out your crystal balls and let me know what you think. But I'd be interested to know, I mean, you're both very, very, very well-informed people, and so your views are better than the vast majority of people. So, Melissa, why don't I hand this over to you, unless you'd like.
Well, I think it's going to be a very similar story. What I've tried to do is 2050 seems so far away. And so what I've tried to do is break the timeline up. So between now and 2030, your fuels are going to look a lot like they do today. It's going to be your conventional fuels, your bio in the conventional fuels when it's available. As soon as it's available, everybody wants it. Your LNGs, biogas in your LNGs. It can be energy efficient technologies along with those. Anything that I miss in the shorter term duration?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's realistic. We'll see some e-methanol come into the market.
Yes. And so we heard about ammonia engines in 2024 by the time the ship is produced, et cetera. So the end of I call this the discovery phase because we're learning. And so it's a lot of, we know hydrogen is the derivative, but in what form, what's going to be available, what are the regulations going to be to price it? Because let's be clear, we don't have a lot of money we're playing around with in shipping. So it has to be scalable, it has to be economical. And that's what's the difficult part, which kind of gets to the next question. That's where, if you ask me beyond 2030, that's the clarity we're looking for. And that's why we started this collaboration, to provide some of that clarity, because you have to start working today to clear up some of the questions we're getting today that we haven't had the opportunity to finish our research. But yes, that's what I believe the future will look like in the short term.
It's a very honest answer. So thank you. Bud, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah,
or?
I mean, I took a stab at a very similar question this morning, but I agree with much of what Melissa said. I think, as I said this morning, I think the prospect of bio and synthetic LNG being available, to me, feels like it's sooner than I would have thought if you'd asked me that question 12 months ago, maybe even 8 months ago. So I think we're going to see some of that starting to come into market. When I said green methanol, I should have been a little bit, or I said e-methanol, I should have been more specific. I think we'll see green methanol, whether it's bio-sourced or whether it's actually a synthesized source. I don't know. And either way, there's going to be, when I say come into the market, it's not like we're all going to be able to go out and get it.
Correct.
I think those that have made the commitments for the volumes and made the investments, maybe through joint ventures or with a trusted energy provider partner, they're going to get some to use. But you got to start somewhere. And as we look into the unknown, or even in that 2030 timeline, where we're doing our best to kind of lay out what's going to come sooner rather than later, I think if you look to those things where the technology to actually use those fuels is proven, we're comfortable with it, and there are standards that exist, I think those are the likely candidates to get in the marketplace on a broader scale sooner, because it's just one other problem you don't have to really be solving from scratch.
Correct. We want to build on what we already know. No need to start from scratch.
In fact, that's something I want to look into next in terms of other industries and what we can learn from them. Before we do that, we do have a question in the audience, so please.
Yes. Hi, my name is John Olson, Yara Marine Technologies. I have a question. Since the future will be a mix of both new fuels and energy efficiency, how much do you expect from energy efficiency, and how much will that contribute to the future in decarbonization?
Well, I'll start with the obvious answer. I think the laws of physics would say until you just stop operating any ships at all, energy efficiency cannot get you all the way there. And I don't think that's an energy efficiency solution. We tried pretty hard in the cruise sector over the last 18 months, and it's not something we'd like to repeat. So I think when you look at those things you can realistically do and still maintain the levels of service that's required, you know, you can look for substantial gain if speed reductions for the ship or the fleet of ships you're looking at actually are on the right place in the power curve to make a big difference. So, and what do I mean by that for those who haven't maybe followed that? It's an exponential relationship between power consumption and speed. So if you are kind of at the far end of the design power for the ship or speed for the ship, if you slow down a little bit, it actually makes a pretty big difference. But if you look at the container sector, we're very, very rarely operating anywhere near there. We're operating much slower than what the ships could theoretically operate at. So we're at a flatter point of the curve. And so as you slow the ships down, you have to slow them down a whole lot to make a big change in energy efficiency. So ships that operate like that are gonna struggle to make big gains just on energy efficiency because they've already kind of taken that big chunk of it out. But could you see technologies that get you 10% gains here and there? Yeah, but it's never going to add up to 100 or more than 100, as I've seen some tables do. But it's going to be part of the mix. And as I said, it's not wasted effort at all, because what I elaborated a little bit on this morning is that will bring more fuels into play sooner than they would have otherwise because of these density challenges. And also it will help bridge what is probably going to be a very substantial price gap as we start to see these new fuels come into the market. I can't give you an exact number, honestly, but we're deploying some technologies where we see 5 to 10% gains from one particular thing we've done. So the low-hanging fruit has definitely already been picked, but there is some fruit that's just a little bit up on the next rung, and with the right investment and being willing to take some risk, I think there's still some significant gains to be had there, even without speed reductions.
So take the efficiency gains, obviously, but that's not where the final solution is necessarily going to come from.
No, you're not going to get there until we get the revolution in fuels and using those fuels on our ships in equipment that's designed for it. We're not going to get to full decarbonization. So we've got to do what we can today. And we've got to do what we can to build the right building blocks so that we can launch better into tomorrow. But energy efficiency, the industry held out hope for that for a while. But honestly, I don't think there's anybody left that really thinks we can get there by just doing energy efficiency, because we really do, in the relatively near future, have to get to a zero profile or a net zero profile.
Yes.
Just moving on a little bit, because we're going to talk a little bit about your collaboration. But before they do that, there obviously 3% is the figure that's thrown around of emissions come from shipping. I think it was mentioned earlier, 3% is a small amount as a percentage, but it's an absolute amount. It's a massive amount. There's no question about that. The real question is, are there other sectors where we can learn a lot of lessons from? And can you think of any of those sectors where we should really be looking for lessons in this area?
Well, yes, we can learn from other sectors, and that is one reason why in Shell we reshaped ourselves for sectors. So I have my colleagues. There's one for aviation, there's one for off-road, there's one for farming, and the commonalities is shipping touches all of those, FYI, is what I learned, number one. Number two is the market wants scalability to share the cost. Everything we're talking about here costs money. It costs, so if we can reuse something so if you're using hydrogen on road, is there something in that infrastructure that I can use to offset the cost? The goal is to reduce the cost to market for something that's reliable. So a lot of the learnings from the car industry, you can kind of get an idea of what may happen in the shipping industry, and we do leverage that. So when we have a department that looks at hydrogen, they're not only looking at hydrogen for shipping, they look at hydrogen overall. And then it's about the technology to take it to that respective market. So yes, there are some commonalities, but there are also some differences as well.
So I'll give you some concrete examples. So the short answer is yes. And I could stop there, but
you won't.
I'm guessing you don't want me to. Yeah.
No.
We're not going to let you.
So let me give you some concrete examples. Aviation, because biofuels may be the only game they've got for a long time. I think we can learn a lot from them about their experience in using aviation type of biofuels, and also the certification processes that go with that, which is kind of challenging. So that's one example. Carbon capture and storage technology has been proven shoreside at scale.
Yes.
If we can look to that and find ways to miniaturize carbon capture technology for the marine environment, we maybe buy a little bit more time to get the alternative fuels in play. I don't know if we'll get there or not, but we're looking at a few projects along those lines, and we've talked about it. When it comes to hydrogen and ammonia, maybe not so much yet as a fuel, but the way that those have been handled and stored safely or unsafely, there's a huge amount for us to learn from that. And there are some ships that have experience with those as cargoes, so we can look to that. And then with road usage, I'll throw one thing in the mix that Melissa didn't mention, and that is the work that they have done on fuel cells is enormous, right? I mean, it is a big potential opportunity, particularly if they could make SOFC fuel cells work where they have some fuel flexibility and aren't locked into just hydrogen. A huge amount has been done there. So if we can leverage that research that's already been done there into a much larger scale per unit that we would need for at sea, those are just some concrete examples.
There are many things I'd love to discuss also with you. Last thing before we do have to close up, because otherwise we will carry on going for the whole evening. Your partnership together, the work you're doing together, if you could just describe a little bit, how and why are you working together to collaborate on decarbonisation? Why don't you start off, Melissa?
I think we've highlighted a lot of how. So how we're working together, we're bringing our technical organizations in, and Bud, feel free to coming on this conversation. But we identified, working together, we had a lot of synergies as far as our decarbonization aspirations. And Shell is not a large ship owner, we're a large charterer of vessels. We have technical department that studies shipping, so our shipping expertise, because we need that to test the fuels. So we have the technical expertise for ship designs, et cetera, and we usually install those in our chartered vessels, but we also need to test it for our fuels. Well, we have a customer and a partner over the years who has access, and I think you said it earlier, Bud, you had access to container vessels, cruise vessels, everything we don't, pretty much.
Yeah,
and
what you don't have, we have.
whatever we don't, we'd only do tankers, they do everything else. And we also realized that we cannot do this alone. We did not have 100 years of experience sitting in the desk that says, okay, if you want to go zero emissions, this is the answer, this is what you do, et cetera. We have about 60%. We know the fuel, but the cost to get it from design to the market is a different, it's a different game. So we have with IMO 2020, reason why it was a drop in the bucket, we could utilize all existing assets. Can't do that with this. It's going to cost. And so to understand the impact to our customers, to the market, to the customer's customers, because Shell does talk to a lot of end user organizations, they're asking us, what are you going to do? I can't answer that question alone. It is, what are we going to do? And that is where, that's why the partnership was important to us, is realizing we can't do this alone. We need some help. But directionally, we want to lead in this space because we believe this is where the future is going to be. It's not easy by any means. It's risky. It's changing the culture in our company, how we get things done. It's basically taking the blanket, shaking the dust out. Okay, guys, let's come together. Take your expertise, but bring it a new approach to how we approach problems. And don't be so fixed. Have a product agnostic. Shell is a supplier of energy. That's what we do. And we want to continue doing that in the future.
Well, thank you very much. But I'm going to put the same question to you.
Sure. I'm sorry, I hope this isn't running too long. Obviously, we could talk about this all day. But from our perspective as a privately held company, a family-owned company, although a big one these days, a couple of things important come from that. One is loyalty and trust through relationships. And there was a time when it was very difficult for the container sector to get fuel they needed to operate ships at all day to day. And I'm talking about not too long ago when the markets really crashed. And Shell was there for us at the time. And that helped build a commercial relationship, which has already evolved. And as I think you can see, I mean, this kind of easy dialogue isn't forced at all. We enjoy working together. And that's kind of a microcosm of the relationship that the two companies have, and that goes at the people that we work for as well. I mean, I think
Yes.
they just have good chemistry. So I wouldn't ever want to limit the partnerships that we engage or suggest that you do to those that meet those criteria. But when you're looking for a place to start, that's a pretty good place to start.
Yes.
And then when you add in the synergies that Melissa described, that they have knowledge, we have knowledge, which either complements each other because they've approached it from a different angle, have different ships than we do, or maybe we were both working on similar things in parallel path. There's a lot of efficiency to be gained in starting the relationship that way. So that's why I think it's worked well. It's those of us of you that know MSC know it's kind of extraordinary that we would be out so publicly talking about something like this. It just isn't really normally in our nature, but we're really excited about it. And we needed a good partner to help us meet our aspirations of net zero. Shell has net zero not just for themselves, but for their scope 3, which includes our customers.
Yes.
So sooner or later, you'll be extinct as a customer if you can't get on board with that fundamental point. So we're trying to go to the same end state, and we might have gotten there different directions separately. We might get there a little bit different direction with the combination of the work that we're doing here.
But let's hope we're more efficient, because if we do it alone, we're going to take longer. You put your resources together, you'll get there faster. And I think that's the message that I think we're hearing here is it's not where we know where we want to go. It's how and when we get there.
That can be the last word for me.
Thank you both very, very much. I mean, it's a pleasure to hear about this collaboration on such an important subject, and it's been very, very interesting to hear. I have a lot of other questions. I'm sure that there are questions in the audience. Unfortunately, we do have to bring this to a close. It's been a long day, and we've had some very interesting presentations. And so now this evening, there is the evening outing on the boat. In fact, it's just out front of the hotel and walk down the quayside to get to it. And so that's, if you can be there around 7, the boat will be sailing at 7:30. It's always an excellent evening. When we had it last year, there was a bit of rain. It did not spoil it at all. We had a great time. And so that should be great fun. And then otherwise, tomorrow morning, we'll be starting off with new technologies for better efficiency. And we're starting off actually at 8:30 for the coffee, and then opening remarks and opening presentation, again by MSC, by your colleague Andre. And then we'll be looking into a lot of different subjects tomorrow. So on that note, thank you very much again, Melissa and Bud. Please join me in saying thank you.
Thank you.
And in turn, thank you all very, very much for your energy today, and I hope you found it very interesting. We're looking forward to tomorrow's day and looking forward to seeing you all on the boat a little bit later. Thank you.